right. Good morning, everyone, and happy Halloween. Good to be together on this fun day. All right, let's see. I am going to call this meeting to order. We'll start with our city clerk with roll call. Oh, I'm sorry. Is he not here yet? Carried my stuff in.
Anita can call.
Okay, yeah. Our city attorney can do roll call for us.
Okay. Commissioner Robbins.
Present.
Commissioner Knight. Present. Commissioner Perdue.
Present. Good morning.
Commissioner Sassi.
Present.
Commissioner O'Connor.
Present.
Mayor Bliss.
Yes.
And
we'll hold off on Commissioner Moody to find out if he's going to be here or not, and then I will ask for a motion to excuse him if something came up and he's not able to join us. All right, with that, Commissioners, we're going to get started today. This is an important day for all of us and for our city team as we think about the future. So we do this every year. Today is a day of big picture thinking and prioritization. It's a day of strategic planning. Unlike the budget, where we get into the details and take a deep dive into departmental budgets and priorities, today is different than that. Today is really providing big picture strategy and prioritization that will give input and feedback to the city manager as he begins putting together the budget priorities for next year. And so this is an important day for us as we help to prioritize and give direction to our appointed officials. City Clerk, our city attorney already called roll call for you.
Oh, thanks.
So with that, I'm going to turn it over to City Manager, and he and his team will lead the process. And there will be ample opportunity after each section for us to ask questions as well as to weigh in with our ideas and our thoughts. All right, I'll turn it over to you.
Thank you, Mayor, and good morning, commissioners and staff. Good to be here, and those residents that are here with us today. Thank you for being here. The mayor did a great job of summarizing the why of today, and we're looking forward to some meaningful dialogue. This has been long anticipated. And to have an opportunity to have this discussion without any other item on the agenda. This is the agenda for today. So with that, let me share with you. You should have a packet of information, the slides, presentation slides, and this 11 by 14 document, the draft focus areas for fiscal year 2025. This will be the primary focus of the day. We're going to use this very intentionally later on after we have some preliminary discussions about our financials. And we'll then get into the prioritization exercise. We'll have a break depending on your needs, saying it lightly. And we'll come back and discuss the prioritization and wrap up. Hopefully, we can get through this by noon today. We don't have a lot of slides for presentation. We want this to be about discussion, and want it to be very interactive. So I'll remind you of this roadmap for strategic discussions. It's not just about the budget. I mean, the budget is certainly very important, but it's about our performance as an organization. It's about our priorities, the future, and so we'll discuss a lot of big, as the mayor said, big policy issues, some in which will not be totally solved over one fiscal year. And some may be long-term, some may be more immediate opportunities. But you'll see that we'll come back. This won't be the last conversation. We'll have another update in February where we'll do a mid-year performance on some of how the organization is performing. And that'll be another opportunity to check in right before the budget is, finalized for submission in April. But the staff is already working on it. There are some things that we know that are drivers and have to be assumed and are required financial obligations for next year, and we're already beginning to, we'll begin to prepare that as we speak. But certainly we want to be agile enough that we can adjust for any policy issues as needed. And so with that, before we start, I always like to be part of a learning organization, and our staff retreated a couple of weeks ago, and we had an opportunity to talk about today, but opportunities where we can learn and improve our competency as leaders and as civil servants, and we focused a lot on our values of the organization: accountability, collaboration, customer service, equity, innovation, and sustainability. And we also focused on how we do things both collaboratively and together among city departments, but also with our elected leaders, with our governing body. And I shared this article last year, the mayor recalls, last year, ICMA article that was written about how staff can best support local elected leaders. And if you think, well, you have a lot of charter functions and responsibilities, but if you were to aggregate the role of local elected officials and staff, there for consideration of primarily 6 big buckets. One, how do we bring people together and bridge building among our community and within the organization, within other governmental entities, the role of helping people to gather around common issues, common problems, common solutions, common future. How do we have a strategic future orientation of where we're trying to go as a city and be very forward-thinking, forward-looking. And then thirdly, how do we have voice for constituents, or how do you, particularly as elected officials? And then for staff, while we're not constituent advocates, we are part of the service delivery that ultimately affects the residents or implementers of your policy. The other role is decision-making, and for your role as a governing body, your decision-making responsibility comes in the official meeting where there's a majority of the city commission that votes or decides something up and down, and then staff on the day-to-day stuff. And so what we'd like to do is take some time and unpack this today. And particularly, how do we become a trustee, and how do we have better oversight? And these are all important but distinguishing roles, and I've asked the mayor to help co-facilitate this exercise, because we have, while the roles are the same, and we have a perspective from the elected and a perspective from the staff, and then we'd like to ask some questions and get some feedback on the various roles. So we'll start off with community building and bringing people together.
All right. You want me to start? We're just going to tag team?
Yep.
All right. So city manager and I talked quite a bit about this, and this is a unique structure of government. I feel like every time I am with other mayors, I'm reminded that every city is governed differently by their charter, and being a city manager council form of government is very, very different than being a strong mayor or full-time council-led form of government. And so I think this distinction and kind of laying out the differences is important, not just for us, but also for community, because I think it can be confusing to community members as well. I know, like all of you, I get calls where people think I have a whole lot more power and authority than I do, and I have to remind them that we are a manager form of government. And so, when we look at this breakdown, the first one is our role around building relationships. Obviously, we are responsible for those that we represent, me being at large for the entire city, each of you being a commissioner that represents a ward. Fortunately, I sat in your seats for 10 years, and I have a pretty good sense of the difference between the two, but also the responsibility that each of you hold. And a big part of that is building relationships with those that we represent, our residents, our business owners, people who work in the city, who work in the wards that we represent, and really building those relationships and listening, and then bringing people together to convene around solving community issues. And you all know that can be as detailed as bringing together residents who live on one street where they're experiencing flooding all the time and trying to coalesce them together to look at options for solutions to a significant neighborhood business issue where it takes convening and bringing together a much larger group to try to address the issues that they're facing in that area. And that's a big part of our job, is that relationship building, consensus building, but also letting people know what we can and can't do. All of us have been in the position where we have to tell people, sorry, that's not something we can do. And so also being really clear, where our authority begins and where it ends. And sometimes those are the hard conversations that we have. But then also, Commissioner Isasi, I loved what you said at our last meeting. Sometimes, reminding people that things take a long time to resolve. And when you talked about her side, the fact that took years to resolve. And sometimes people want us to have an answer right away, and that's just not realistic at times. City Manager?
Yeah, and I think from the staff perspective, certainly bringing community together is important, but my first assembly, there are two, and equally important. First of all, bringing the elected governing body together on policy issues, making sure that I know what the majority of the governing body is officially supporting in terms of formal meetings, as well as also any direction from the dais. And also bringing people together within the ward, since we have dual representation, making sure that it's clear to understand what the preference is, or whether there's disagreement even among the wards, but then bringing the staff together. And as to the degree possible, making sure that the city speaks with one voice, that you don't get three different perspectives from three different departments about the same issue and confusing residents as well as employees within the organization. So how do we continue to bring people, staff together, work across departmental line, and then certainly community. And having, and really depending, obviously, you know the wards because you've lived in them, and leveraging your familiarity, but also the services. How do we continue to bring community together, but not get ahead of the elected officials on certain issues? So that's a delicate dance. And then bringing the other governmental agencies and stakeholders. Do we have any water? Hot water? Okay, so we'll pause there. Other thoughts, and you'll have to, this is participatory, thoughts on community building and bringing people together. And this is important because we found it was real hard during the pandemic. And because we couldn't bring people together, there was a lot of polarity. And so I think our community night out meetings have helped to do that. Matter of fact, I know it has. It's been cited as one of the better practices of local government, having, and we heard this, we want more than 3 minutes. And how do we have 3 minutes? How do we bring people together outside of just public comment? So I think those have helped as well. Thoughts?
All right.
Yeah.
Next
All right.
section.
Right? Strategic
Jump in if you want.
Yeah. Strategic visioning, big picture thinking.
Yeah, and I'll just say, I know all of us have had to work through this, that our responsibility is to help people see big picture and long term. And, sometimes we have to respond to issues immediately, but we also have to be mindful not to be reactive and to have a response that doesn't take into consideration long-term impact on our community. And it's twofold, right? Like sometimes we do have to resolve the issue at hand, but we also have to be thinking about how do we solve this for the future and make sure that it's solved long after all of us are gone. When I was reading through this, immediately I thought of a couple things from my days as commissioner. And the reality is what city manager said, we all live in our neighborhoods and we see things that city staff don't see. And we have conversations city staff don't have. So bringing that forward, but also being engaged in solving problems. And it reminded me of when I was first elected and, we had significant issues in our park system. Our parks had been slashed, our budget had been slashed, our parks were falling apart. Yes, we needed some immediate work done in parks, so we pulled together volunteers and we raised private dollars to open swimming pools, but we knew that that wasn't a long-term solution. And so being a part of starting up Friends of Grand Rapids Parks and then being a part of passing a dedicated parks millage, so that's our job, right, is how do we work with community to solve immediate issues, but then how do we think long-term and think about ways that we can make sure that the work we're doing today has a benefit for generations to come and really solves an issue long-term. And it's hard work. It goes back to bringing people together and building relationships and convening people together around a shared vision, and then being a part of that work and making sure it happens.
Yeah, and from the staff perspective, it's using the tools. The comprehensive plan, master planning is one of the big picture opportunities. That it also involves bringing people together, capital planning, long-term big picture thinking, strategic planning, budget, fiscal planning. But the difference is, I think from a staff perspective, while 100% of the commission, 100%, are residents of this community, by charter, required to live in the ward. Our staff have, while not all may be residents in the city, they come with expertise perhaps from other communities, or should be aware of practices in other communities outside of Grand Rapids. And so as we think of, strategic visioning planning, you should have the lived experience from the residents' perspective, but also a good understanding of what happens in the context of the experience outside of our city, and making sure that we are among those communities with best practices. Thoughts? Staying ahead of the issue. Commissioner Sassi?
Thank you. I think a good example of where this has been put into action is I'm thinking about our Brownfield and Economic Development Board. So I think there was a lot of questions, obviously looking at things individually and looking at the application, but it was really important. I think this was maybe 3 or 4 meetings ago, and I see Jono in the room, where we said we want to explain to them what we're doing with the Housing Trust Fund Board, because many of those members, we're asking where do these projects fit in terms of affordability, recognizing that this tool is used for something specific and not solely was created for affordability. We also, I think, gave them an update about the Housing Next report. And so I think sometimes we're moving at very quick speeds, and so we forget, we've had this conversation, but other bodies that we brought together maybe didn't have that. And so I think at the time, Jeremiah and Jono, leading that board as liaison, saw that there was an opportunity to make sure that we weren't leaving that board out of the conversation. So, because the questions were kind of like, why aren't you doing this? We have this piece, but we need to put them together. So I think that's another good example. Another good example was the CIAs and the bids came together last week. There was a learning session that was facilitated, 4 hours of learning, where, again, all those resident members were able to get a sense of what we're probably talking about on a weekly basis. And I think I heard that it was a very helpful session to members. So I think that's how we can, because it is hard to connect to people, one-to-one. And I think the next biggest thing will be, around these land use considerations that come before us. Because I think, this is the month of a lot of annual meetings for groups like neighborhood associations or other associations. And I think it's interesting, in one breath, we want people to have affordable places to live. I think everybody in this community can agree on that. The question and potentially the heartburn is, how do we get that done? And I think that's where you balance what are people's individual experiences, and also what are the realities of what we're entrusted to do and the challenges that people are asking us to fix. So I just want to share those two.
Yeah, those are great examples. And I often remind folks, we're the second largest city in the state of Michigan, 200,000 people, and you all represent 65 to 70,000 people. And having those opportunities for one-on-one conversations can be really difficult, so we have to be really strategic at times. All right. Should we go on to the next one? The next one is probably the one that causes some of the greatest strain, I think, on our time and on our work as elected officials is we do a lot of constituent work. I think even more so as a commissioner than as mayor. I still respond to a lot of constituent calls, but I'm also working more on regional, state, other kind of bigger issues. And you all are often the first line of, you're actually the first phone call. Usually people call, the first phone number people call when they're frustrated with a city service or when they're unhappy or when there's a problem that they need solved. And I know it ebbs and flows, and some days can be really busy with constituent calls and some days a little bit lighter, but it's constant. Whether it's phone calls or emails or text messages, and now with social media, people will message you, and it's unending. It's unending. And this, I think, is where the rub is sometimes, is that we want to respond immediately and get the problem resolved. Sometimes it's on a Saturday and the city isn't even open and the staff person you need to do it isn't even here, or a Sunday or an evening when we get the call. And I think this is the biggest challenge at times, is that we want good customer service and we want the issues that people have responded to quickly and resolved, and we want a feedback loop and we want to know that it's been resolved. Now, sometimes we're not able to resolve it right away for a whole host of reasons, or there may be bigger issues that we weren't aware of, or there's a whole nother side of the story that we weren't aware of, and so it's a little more complicated than we expected. But ultimately, that's a big part of our job, is responding to the people that we represent, and then making that connection with city staff, the most appropriate city staff that can resolve the issue. And this is where it takes a lot of communication and often a lot of work on our end, but I would also say sometimes it can be one of the most frustrating things for us as elected officials, because we just want to go out and fix the problem, but it's not our job to fix the problem. So that's where it's really important that we work together with city staff.
Yeah, I think, of course, residents want to know that they are seen, heard, taken seriously. And the first stop of any service should be to whatever the service delivery process is through staff and departments. And whether it is a problem with the city, or, as you said, there are some issues that involves other agencies or other jurisdictions, there should be education. But what I have heard is from this body is the need to have more closure on the complaint process. 311, how the calls come in, they get allocated to departments, and we have very intentionally gone back and look at how we can improve the service level and the closure of complaints and follow-up. And there are times, though, and we'll talk about this in the other role of a steward trustee, where it's not a matter of did you get an answer, it's what the answer is, and every answer can't be yes. And I think as a constituent advocate, you want to solve every problem, and because you want to advocate, and we want to be able to do it. And it may be it'll get done, and it's just not in a time, manner, and place in which someone is expecting it. And we got to ask, how realistic are those expectations? Are our expectations really clear on how long something will take, and are there resources to get whatever the service done in that type of timely manner, whether it's people or process, or if it's a policy issue. So sometimes it's clearly one or the other. Clearly could be performance, could be policy, could be procedure, or it could be a lot of other our personnel. I think that's consistent with performance. And so we want to make sure we improve that. We talked about real intentionally at our retreat about improving the level of customer service, even with technology. And so those are some of the things that are forward thinking. You'll see that as we get into some of the issues later today, what we can do to improve service delivery. Right? Next one.
Yep.
Good. I'm sorry. Go right ahead.
Okay. Good morning again. So on that piece of constituent relationships, I think for me, one of the hardest things is kind of being that middle person. So there's that closure piece, but usually when you connect with the right person, there is closure. Like staff are really great about that, in my experience. But it's finding who the right person is in this big building, and having long email threads of like who is the right person to connect someone to. And often that work feels duplicative, right? Because we have the resources and the services that already exist, and so helping constituents navigate and find those folks seem like that service already exists. How do we utilize those existing pathways in a way that we know has that follow-up, has that conclusion? We all know that this role is part-time. We have a lot of demands on our time. And so as I look through all 6 of these areas, certainly probably the majority of my time when we're not in meetings is around this area. And I find that a big chunk of that time is on things that could have been resolved without me. I want to be able to spend my time on things that can't necessarily be resolved without me. I want to spend more of my time on issue area research. We don't have staff. We don't have a support team, even though we're working on these huge issues like housing, right? And I don't have a subject matter expert that I can turn to. We do have city staff that certainly are super helpful of kind of helping us understand operationally and historically how we've approached items. But I would find it to be helpful for these big items that we're walking into, support to how to look at that issue through my lens of values, through my lens of lived experience. And it's sometimes difficult relying on a different set of team members that are not necessarily, report to me, report to my values checklist, my expectations. So I hope that makes sense. And I just want to color in that constituent support, why it's so important. I do find that a big chunk of what I'm doing in that area can be done without me. And with so many demands on my time, I would like to be able to spend my time on more things like community building, strategic vision, so on and so forth. So that's one piece of feedback. And then I also just want to, related to strategic thinking and service delivery, one thing that I share openly is that one of my biggest surprises this year is how many just really experienced, smart people we have leading the work within City Hall. Like, it's actually made me more optimistic about what's happening behind the scenes, of kind of having that interaction. And sometimes from the dais, when we're having conversations, it is a tension point to say, thank you for your work. This is really thoughtful. And here's another perspective, and I disagree, and I want to push back on that. And so just want to name that as we talk about tensions between staff and management and elected officials, that's one I've experienced. And I've even shared kind of one-on-one something that I did not share here. And the question was, why didn't you share it? I was like, I'm because of this, the dynamic, right? And I appreciate the work. I honor their work. I didn't know if that was a setting to say, here's all the things that I think. And so that's a tension that, I'll continue to work through. And I'm sure my colleagues are actively doing that as well. But just wanted to name that for the room as we talk through kind of these responsibilities.
Yeah, Commissioner, I think that's an excellent point. And that, to me, goes back to, our role. And, all of us have different styles. But I know for me, a couple things, especially when I first became a commissioner, right? A lot of it is building those relationships so you know who the go-to is, or you know who you can rely on, you know who you can go to get the information that you need to make the decisions. Sometimes we don't have it in-house. Sometimes we want a third-party expert. And there's been lots of times over the years where we say, let's bring in a consultant that can study this and provide us with best practices and with good information. And we've done that on a whole host of issues, everything from, policing and community police relations and parks and environmental sustainability. And then also, how do we have difficult conversations? And, everybody has their own philosophy. Mine has always been, a lot of those conversations should happen privately and not in a public meeting, just out of respect to individuals. But with that being said, I think we can challenge and ask hard questions and do it in a thoughtful way and have that conversation publicly. I think our job is to figure out when is it best to have it one-on-one versus in a public meeting? And what conversations and questions can we get answered before we get to a meeting where we're asked to cast a vote?
I totally agree. And there was an instance where I was getting a lot of feedback from neighborhood residents and business owners about some proposed parking changes. And I was ready to really dig into this with city teams and just sat down and just from a lens of curiosity of let's talk through this. These are my concerns, but tell me your thinking. And after hearing from their truly subject matter expertise, I said, oh, well, this is undeniable. Now how can I be a bridge builder to help connect the dots on both ends for you to understand kind of community concerns and how do we scaffold up to this, and to help community understand what this means for safety and vitality and so on and so forth. So I appreciate folks for making themselves available and totally agree on the importance of having the conversation, the right place, right time, right manner.
Yeah. Commissioner O'Connor, and then Commissioner Isasi, and then Commissioner Robbins.
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I think I brought it up at the last meeting, but haven't done this job now for 8 years, right? Like when we started, we didn't have 311, we didn't have some of the support services, and those things have been invaluable, I think, at being a bridge builder for constituents. But I still think there's some gaps in the system, right? Like I've been here 8 years, I know what city staff to reach out to for most issues now because of that lived experience. But at the same time, I still feel like there's some gaps in the system. And Commissioner Robbins and I and City Manager have talked about a customer relations management type thing. And again, I trust that if I send an email off to 2 or 3 people in various departments, it gets followed up on because we have good professional staff that does that. Sometimes I feel like a burden if I have to go to a department head for a issue that could be solved by someone else. And sometimes I feel like if there was just a place to input information to say this is out there and there's a way to track what happens, good, bad, and different, to the point that, some things are going to be solved because they can be. Some things, not every request that we get is, reasonable and or even the responsibility of the city to navigate. But to know that an issue comes in, it's been looked at, who's looked at it, and yes, no, I can move on, or do I need to continue to follow up on that? Just being able to track that would be very, very, I think, helpful for me and for constituents to know that, my issue's been at least seen by the right people, and some sort of determination can be made about if there's action to be taken, or if it's just it's moot and we can move on. But at least knowing where it stands in process. I think the 311 app has it's okay. I think it could use some improved functionality. It's got some of that tracking in it, but I don't think that app is not the most user friendly. It's not the It lacks some functionality that I think could be better served by better technology.
Yeah, I agree. Commissioner Isasi, and then Commissioner Robbins.
Thank you. I'll absolutely echo what both my colleagues have just said. I think that we just had a really large presentation on communication last week, and so I think we need to think about this as part of the engagement process. If somebody's taking time out of their day to either call 311 or to submit something on the app, that means that it means enough for them to take something take that time out of their day. So they've engaged with us in a way. So I really think, some of the opportunities that David shared, I think, are really good points to say this is an engagement. It's not just a service, but it's an engagement with our community, and to think about it that way. And I think that's why this part of what we do is so important. Like you said, all the pieces are important, but this really rises as the average person is saying, well, I'm going to reach out to so-and-so and they're going to solve something for me, right? Even though it is not us doing that alone by any means, and we know that. So I think thinking about it from an engagement standpoint, and then I also think we have a lot of good data, but I don't think we have as much analysis of how we can get, so we have lagging indicators, but maybe not looking at some leading indicators of things that we can, and I'll, looking at the data person over here, my colleague, just where is the analysis in the reports of things? Are we seeing this in this certain ward, in this certain precinct? What are these particular attributes that are happening in a neighborhood or that are coming to fruition? A lot of the times, and I think we probably could break it up of what is communication as it relates to an issue that is the next point, which is where we become a decision maker and people want to know what's our decision. Or is it a city service, or is it something else that is completely, I'd love to see that breakdown, something that really should be solved at the state level, the county level, or quite honestly, we got a lot of people who are frequent flyers and we get like 20 messages from them. So I'd love to be able to drill that down a little bit on some of that analysis, like where did last month look like? Where did 3 months ago look like? I also think we have to recognize that we are, this is my 4th year, and the first years were just about people's trying to survive through COVID. And so now I think we are experiencing different requests, different things as it relates to what is this economy looking like right now. So those are just two of the areas that I think. So I've even thought about, I have an automatic reply on my message, if thanks for reaching out. If for things that are probably this or this or this, my suggestion would be to reach out to 311 because they're going to be able to resolve it faster than I can. If it's something related to a topic or issue that will come before the commission, I'll follow up with you in, a set amount of time. So,
Yeah.
thanks.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner Robbins?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. I guess just one thing to add. I think everything my colleagues have said is great. I do think that sometimes customer service defaults to being kind of a reactive process, though, and I think one of my long-term visions or goals when it comes to how we deal with our residents is adding in some more proactive elements. And I think a lot of that goes back to community building and falls on us as representatives to be building a community where we've got mutual trust with each other and the relationship currency to know that when things take a long time, it's not because we're not paying attention to it or we're not working on it behind the scenes. But I guess I'm trying to think of, long-term too, what would it look like to be more proactive in reaching out to ask for feedback on systems like, trash, refuse, and things like that. Because I think oftentimes the only touch point residents have with the city on those things is if there's an issue. And I think we miss a lot of good information in potential proactive problem solving if we're able to reach people and get feedback on the front end too, instead of waiting for things to break. So whatever that looks like in the future, and however I can help with ideas or talking to constituents about what that could look like, I'm happy to. But that's just kind of another lens I wanted to add to that.
Yeah, thanks. Good feedback. I've always been an advocate for more regular surveying and getting feedback from constituents outside of the significant national survey that we do every couple of years. So.
Here, if I could, before we go on to the next section,
Yeah.
just a couple of things. I do think I want to make sure to frame this as you're not in your office by yourself. You do have staff. You have appointed staff directly to you, and then you should not have to make 3-4 calls in the organizations to coordinate across departments, because then you are doing staff work. If you are trying to get multiple departments aligned, responding to an issue. And so at that level, it should be when a call comes in to 311 and it's sent out to multiple departments, which they often do, a coordinated response back to let you know what the issues or what the problem was. But if it's not a 311 call and you're having to call multiple departments to get an answer, or maybe one, and then what I see sometimes, it is multiple departments that need to be involved, where no one department has complete ownership of an issue. And because there's complexity, sometimes a matter is just so complex where it could be new territory. And so I would hope we get to a point where you don't have to do that. You shouldn't have to do that, particularly as part-time elected officials, where you have to spend a whole day chasing down a problem. That's not good. That's what we want good staff work to be. And if a matter becomes that complex, then my office needs to be involved in helping to get resolution and getting decisions. And I know that Commissioner O'Connor says, well, I don't want to, department directors shouldn't have to get involved in real routine matters, and I agree. There should be systems in place. But there are times where it gets so complicated, it has to be escalated up, even beyond the department director. And then it becomes a learning, to your point, Commissioner Ryan, then it becomes a learning opportunity, and then we can become proactive about anticipating future situations similar to those unique challenges. So I say all that to say, you shouldn't have to make 4 or 5 calls to find out an answer to a problem.
Yeah.
That something's broken if that's happening.
Yeah. You know, in thinking about this and thinking about all the calls that we get, I agree with Commissioner Robbins that and I agree with all the comments. I think there's, and I would say this with everything that we're going to be talking about today, there's always room for improvement, especially in a large organization like this. You know, sometimes we get calls. I just got a call yesterday. A guy couldn't pay for his refuse online, so I got to follow up with him today. He tried 3 times. So that's an individual issue. However, sometimes it's an issue. I've gotten calls where the water coming out of somebody's faucet is brown, and they don't know why, and they're worried about the quality of their water. That, to me, is something proactive, because typically it's related to a water break, and a certain area is impacted, and that's where proactively, as commissioners who represent that neighborhood and the mayor, we could get a proactive email saying, hey, want to give you a heads up about this water main break and that you may be getting calls about water. And then we have the answer, because I get the call about the water, and then I have to call and figure out from the water department, was this a water main break? When will it be fixed? What can I respond to the what can I tell the resident? So I think it's twofold, right? Like, it's when we get a call in, who's the best person to respond as quickly as possible to help the guy who couldn't pay his refuse bill online, versus something that probably a number of residents in a neighborhood are experiencing because of something we knew about, or a road closure that came up unexpectedly, that we could get alerted about, and just as an FYI, so then if we do get the call, we have the answer right away, and we don't have to make calls to get the information to call the person back. So I think there's probably a number of ways that we can improve, and that's something that we'll just have to continue to work on with the city manager, both on the proactive side as well as the reactive side, to be as responsive and be able to respond to those issues as quickly as possible. And then there's bigger issues. You know, Commissioner O'Connor and I have talked at length about some bigger issues around timeliness and cost, and those, I think, are bigger issues that we need to tackle on how do we improve overall process internally. Commissioner?
Yeah, thank you, Mayor. And I think one other thing is just people have, globally speaking, have a general distrust of elected officials and government at this point. And it's been exacerbated locally by influences at the federal and state levels that, kind of permeate into all of this. And I think we have opportunities in the city, because we do a great job of handling issues for our constituents, and the staff does a great job of following up on things. But it's those little things that, like, if a problem can be solved and solved quickly, or at least a response formulated and that gives people faith that at least locally it's still working for them, and that they're maybe the distrust isn't as high then, that it's just, even if it's just a basic response sometimes, that yes, I got your email and I can't fix your giant problem right now, but we acknowledge that it's an issue, or that it's something we're working on. That builds a lot of, maybe brings a little bit of goodwill back to the people of Grand Rapids and the people that, are tasked with solving those problems.
Yeah, thanks. All right, let's move on so we can get to the meat of the presentations. Next one, decision maker. I think we all know this. Our job, especially when it comes to charter requirements, is around making decisions largely around policy and budget. And that's what we do on Tuesdays when we're together at our commission meetings, during standing committee meetings. And again, we all know it's our responsibility to learn as much as we can about the issue, to ask the questions, to learn about the history, and then as we make decisions, really making decisions on what we believe is in the best interest of the community long term. Sometimes there's difficult decisions to be made, and I know many of us wrestle with decisions regularly, and that's the weight that we carry as being elected officials. City Manager?
Yeah, and our job is carry out those decisions on big policy issues, but on day-to-day resources, making sure that we do the best to allocate resources and across the organization. And there are a lot of decisions that are heavily weighed and made on the operational side, and we don't share them with you. I mean, you see the outcome of it. But I know that when we do make decisions, we emphasize using values, using resident perspective, understanding how commissioners will likely be impacted or not impacted by what is being decided. I mean, this is at the senior management level, and obviously people are trained day to day to follow policy on policy and protocol, and make sure that they follow the training. So.
Yeah. All right. Go ahead, Commissioner.
I'll finally chime in. Just going back to that specific thing right there, as stated in this document, part of what we do are to be community builders, and to Commissioner O'Connor's statement is the trust level that people have with people who are in elected positions, and knowing that they're going to make the right decisions, and some of that is all guided by what happens around us globally. But part of that is for us to be decision makers. For me, I like to have as much information as I can before I jump out in the water, and I can move very fast on some things, and other things I just need to know more information. But part of my my issue with some of it is that we don't get the information to me fast enough. Like we get it in the moment, and then we have the opportunity to look at it, and now we have to make a decision. And sometimes that's not always the best way to do it. At least the way I process things, the way I do things, I feel like we don't get things quick enough to be able to get enough communication and information from our constituents, or to be able to talk to them a little bit more about what's going on, to be able to make that decision in that time frame. And I think that adds to some of the distrust and confusion that happens with people when they don't know what's going on, right? And so that's just a piece that I want to add to that. And I think I've been saying it for almost a year now. And I'm going to keep saying it because it's just what I need, and I have to push because I don't want to make decisions for 60, 70,000 people with information that is not all the way there. And I'm not saying that people here, when they put things together, don't do their research on it, but I need to know more, and I don't feel like we have enough time from the time that we receive stuff to the time we have to make a decision that there is enough in there.
Okay.
Mayor,
Yeah, go ahead.
because I know the staff is wanting to know probably more detail what instances that are, because anytime there's a vote, the information is produced in advance of the meeting. And so if there are specific things outside of a public meeting that's expected, then we can note that. But typically, whatever you vote on, you will get in advance of the meeting, both with the required publication and as much information as possible prior to then. And if there are times where, we have an item on the agenda and it feels like, and I think we've done that before, we've tabled items before, but anytime there's a public vote, you will always get the information in advance of the meeting itself.
That's
And-
not what I meant, but I'm.
Yeah.
But
I
that's
think that's
what.
good feedback, and especially on, I would say, more complex issues that we know we're going to wrestle with for a long time. Having conversations and heads up, and especially if there's a history there that we need to know about. So the one I think of right off the top of my head, and I'm looking at Commissioner Sassi because she's on the board of the nonprofit we created, is the issue around marijuana and licensing and MyVita and Cysiva, and it years we worked on this, and we've had hiccups and issues, and it's complicated. I mean, it's probably more complicated than any of us had hoped. And there's no way getting the information 5 days ahead of time would be helpful. Like, it's complex. And honestly, we could spend an hour, 90 minutes just going through the history and how we got to where we are today. So I do hear what you're saying, and I think you're right, especially on some issues that are ongoing, that are really complex. Having opportunity to really get a good tutorial on the history and where we are and what the current issue is, and, you know, what are some things that we still need to work on to improve. I think you're right. So that's good feedback. Commissioner?
I was just going to add that that was a good example that you used, because we were going to have a hearing, and then that just recently canceled because the operator decided to move forward with the transfer process that we've created. But as we were having a conversation, Commissioner Perdue and I, with Deputy City Attorney, you know, I think that there was so many things to review, but that had been done in another session. And so, but I don't want to speak for you, Commissioner, but she was going to be asked to review it. And so it was like, you know what, we need to have another refresh session, even for myself too, because it had been some time. So I think that there's, like, I see around that there's some pockets. I also think that we have an opportunity, and maybe this goes back to the community building, but just to remind people who has authority and what body and why. Most common is with our planning commission.
Yeah.
And so, you know, of course, anybody can write us, I believe, and tell us anything that they think or that they feel. But I also want to make sure that they're directing the communication to the right body that would make that decision. And I think that probably lies with whether it is, you know, a FOIA appeals board, whether it's this body, whether it's a planning commission. And I think Ms. Turkelson had probably lots and lots of messages over the last couple weeks for one item that was on our agenda. I see her smiling back there. And, you know, always reminding people where the authority lies, so that they can be sure to direct the communication to that right body.
Yeah. And, you know, I'm so glad you brought that up, especially having had conversations with folks last week about a planning commission issue. You know, in addition to letting people know about where the authority begins and ends, also explaining why that is, right? So, like, last week I had several conversations with folks about a planning commission issue, and I said, you know, this is a decision that won't come before the city commission. Planning commission and BZA, they are quasi-judicial bodies. They are independent for a reason, and the reason is to prevent, quite frankly, political pressure on decisions, and to prevent potentially elected officials being swayed or influenced inappropriately. And there's a reason why there are clear lines and delineation between bodies for decision making, and our job. And I actually am really proud of the fact that Grand Rapids has a long history of integrity and objectivity in decision making, unlike some other cities that have been ripe with corruption and issues that I am very proud that has not been the history of our city, and that we have clear processes in place where there is accountability and objective decisions are made. And so helping people understand why that is, you know, the reason for that, I think is also really helpful. All right, let's move on. That, I think, goes into the next two items, and we'll just briefly touch on these so that we can get moving with the presentations. We all know that a big part of our job is to be trustees. This is, I very often, when I talk about the structure of our government, I talk about how the elected body is like a board of trustees, that we are stewards of resources and assets, that we have to make decisions at times for what is in the best interest of the organization, as the trustee of the organization, but also we also have to make decisions on what is best for the community. And often we have to, all of us, if you haven't been put in this position yet, you will. All of us have had to make decisions where we have to put our own personal perspective aside and think about what is in the best interest of our community and the greater good. And those are really hard decisions to make. Are you in need? Somebody calling you? those are actually often decisions where I go and counsel with this awesome city attorney when I'm struggling, because sometimes it is around legal issues, right? We have a lot of legal issues that we have to tackle, whether it's around pending litigation or settlements, and we really have to think about being a steward of the organization in those decisions, and those are issues that I think if you haven't struggled with yet, you will. And it's another responsibility, and I think it goes hand in hand with our responsibility around oversight and accountability. You know, it's our job. We appoint 4 appointed officials. It's our responsibility to provide oversight and accountability for the appointed officials, that they're doing their job to the best of their ability, but also supporting them to do their job and to be their best selves. And then it's our responsibility around oversight. And I think this goes what Commissioner Knight said. There's a lot of information that we need to review. I mean, there have been times where our packets are 400 pages long. Our budget book is sometimes over 500 pages. There are audits that are lengthy. There are reviews of our pension funds that we have to review. There are policies that we have to review. Sometimes we have to go back to the charter. Sometimes we have to look at state law. It's a lot of information that we need to digest on any given day, any given week, in order to be informed, so that we are able to provide good oversight and accountability. City Manager?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. From the staff perspective, our stewardship is based on, your decisions on policies, things that have already been approved. But also, our stewardship requires us to do the thorough financial, legal, operational analysis and offer alternatives for consideration. And so it may not be exactly what you may have envisioned or requested, but we'll try as best to get there or offer alternatives. Or if by our financial, legal, professional, analysis, it may be a recommendation in opposition of what has been requested. Now, it's a recommendation, it's not a decision, but we owe that to you and to the public, to just like you owe it to constituents sometime to make those hard decisions. We also have to provide you all the information, both of what you ask and what you may not have asked for consideration. And I expect the staff to do that for me as well, to certainly do what I've asked, but if there are things I need to consider that I may not actually want to hear, I need to know that before I make a decision so I can make a well-informed decision. And so if you hear that from staff at times, I know it may seem like it's a little reluctant or recalcitrant, but I think many people are trying to just make sure that decision makers are as informed as possible about both the intended and unintended consequences. Then, as part of stewardship. Then the last on oversight, we spent a lot of time at the retreat talking about accountability and making sure we get done what we say we're going to do. I would ask if there are ever any, and many of you are really good about bringing issues to my attention, but there is concerns about performance. And what will help me is to be specific as possible, both to the department and the employee, in providing feedback, just as if we would have citizens who are dissatisfied about conduct of any city employee or police officers, et cetera. For example, that we get best outcomes when there's a specific complaint, a person, and if we need to follow up, and sometimes it's just bringing an issue to employees' awareness. If it's conduct, behavior, we'll certainly follow up on that. Other times it may be processes and resources that need to be addressed in order to make sure that we have good outcomes and oversight. But I want to assure you that we are not afraid of accountability in the tough conversations, but I do want to be fair to the employees to make sure that what we sometimes hear as generalized complaints to make sure that we can get to the bottom of it, we have to get the specifics around the issue. So if you hear concerns about organizational performance or individual performance, so I certainly am interested in getting to the specifics and having managers and supervisors follow up on it.
All right. I think we should go to feedback on the 2 questions to move us along here. So next slide.
Oh, yeah, sorry.
There we go.
Yeah. Yep, last 2, I've got a lot of feedback too in the session. Where do you think more focus is needed? I've heard quite a bit of feedback, and if there's any emphasis where we should be not as focused on.
Yeah. All right, and I'll start. So if you have additional feedback on where do you think more focus is needed or where do you think less focus is needed, here's an opportunity to provide that to city manager. And so for me, I think it affirms a lot of what was said already around this table. But to me, if I think specifically as an organization, I really want more focus on responsiveness. I would like clear expectations around responsiveness and timeliness. So here's the expectation. If I'm a small business and I'm applying for a liquor license, here's what I can expect the turnaround will be. And then somebody is holding whoever's responsible for that accountable to meet that timeline. If I'm asking for a permit for an event, if I am asking for an inspection or permits, people should know on the front end what the cost is going to be and how quickly they're going to get a response. And then we should strive to meet those timelines. And if we don't, there should be some accountability within that department. I would also say more focus. I'm not just picking on you, City Clerk. I'm just using examples. The other thing, this was something I was really proud of, especially during the Great Recession, is that city government, especially City of Grand Rapids, we became very good at creative problem solving and helping people get to yes, particularly when resources were stretched. And I would like us to continue to strive to be creative problem solvers and an organization that helps people get to yes. Can we always get to yes? No. But if there is a path forward, we should come alongside and help people problem solve and not just be quick to say no because we have the authority to say no. And I think that requires a lot of empathy and trying to put ourselves in people's shoes, whether it's a resident who's struggling, a business owner who's struggling, a developer that's trying to meet deadlines. We really need to have a lot of empathy and be a partner when people reach out to the city and need something. And then I would say, where do I think we should spend less focus? I already told the city manager this, but I'll add it publicly. There's a lot happening. There's a lot of momentum in our city. There's a lot of work being done. There's a lot of needs in our city that needs to be addressed. And I think sometimes we can spend a lot of times in meetings talking about things instead of focus on giving people the time they need to actually get things done. So how do we make meetings more meaningful and maybe even look at how do we reduce the amount of time that staff are spending in meetings, especially if it's redundant and they're regurgitating the same thing over and over. And then also, how do we make sure that we're not letting perfect get in the way of progress? We don't need things to be perfect. We need things to move forward and we need action. If there's one thing I've heard people get frustrated about is that things don't move quick enough and they want to see that things are moving and they want to stop talking about it. And even if we don't get it right the first time, that's okay. And I think sometimes we let wanting things to be perfect get in the way of actually just moving forward. So that's my feedback on these 2 questions. Commissioners, anything else to add or give feedback to the city manager around where do we think more focus needs to be or less focus needs to be?
I appreciate what you said because a lot of it resonated with me. I'm angry about those flurries out there, though. And to add just a little bit more, when we talked about, better customer service, and I know, people are human, and so we have to understand that everybody's bandwidth is very different. However, that is something like for me that I thrive on is customer service and thinking about, the people that call 311, the people that might call about something that we think is just like, why are you calling me? To understand their humanity and seeing through a different lens and how we respond to people, regardless of how our day is coming in through that door. And so, and some of that may lead to some of the other things that we're going to be talking about going forward about, employee retention and those types of things that we know how our world is right now with people trying to get, qualified employees, but also people need jobs. So it's not just about hiring a person, but hiring a person that understands that our community is not just a customer, they're a client guest, right? And that they have the same needs that we have when we check out of work and go home, that we're still a part of this community. So just adding more to that, how do we serve people better? And if we remember that that's who we are all public service in this space, and we learn how to serve people better, we can probably do a whole lot better for the people we're serving.
Yeah, well said. Thanks. Commissioners, any other feedback for City Manager on this? Commissioner Perdue and then Commissioner Robbins.
Thank you. I also agree with a lot of the pieces you mentioned, particularly the responsiveness and timeliness, just expectations so that folks know what to expect, especially if they're going through city processes for the first time. I will also add, one thing that an area where I think more focus, we have an opportunity. We do a lot of community engagement. We've certainly invested in that area. And on the staff side, but when I think about our roles as elected officials, this area of community building and convening community, doing town halls, we don't have resources to do that now, at least clearly defined resources. So I think that's an opportunity area. Commissioner Moody and I meet with the Third Ward neighborhood associations on a regular basis, and we want to do something bigger together. And what resources might we have at our disposal, whether it's to plan a town hall or it's to feed families who come to participate in conversations with us. So just thinking about, I would like to lean more into that piece, and especially for my constituents, I think that's a huge interest and opportunity area. I think this relates a little bit to what the mayor said, but the idea of prioritization came up for me really quickly. We have a lot going on at any given time for good reason. I think there's opportunities to go deeper sometimes as opposed to go wide, right? You go wide and you go narrow, or you can go kind of a little bit more narrow and deep. And so kind of really being clear about priorities in different seasons and seeing things to completion and making sure that we have true outcomes that are responsive to community need, and prioritizing that over the activity of doing and responding. I think we have a lot of pressure to do. Right? People are like, you need to do something. And so often we're like, all right, we will do something. Now, later, we have to do. We have to show that we're responsive as staff, as elected officials, and kind of thinking about priorities, use of time, resources, making sure that the doing really is strategic and to an end that truly meets community needs and requests. And the last area I think really relates to oversight, and interestingly, this article said that oversight did not come up as kind of a top interest or priority area amongst elected officials surveyed for this. But one area of oversight that I haven't, at least in this year, had line of sight into, but I think is very important to everything we talk about, is the culture within City Hall amongst staff and staff satisfaction. And so I don't know if there are current surveys or input points for that, but I will be interested in seeing that. That impacts how we show up and support people. That impacts how team members feel empowered or resources, so on and so forth. So that's another area that I think going into the next year, we have an opportunity to talk a little bit more about, or at least have line of sight since I've been here. I think that's it. Thank you.
Thank you. Well said. Commissioner Robbins?
Yeah, thanks, Mayor. I agree with everything my colleagues are saying. I think I just want to reiterate the getting to yes concept. I think that's something that I've had a lot of conversations about. And granted, like, Commissioner Perdue was saying, there's many things going on and so many priorities for the staff to juggle. And I know we're having conversations about what it looks like to augment their staff to be able to give each of those things adequate attention. But I think that sometimes it feels like there's an immediate reaction just to say no, because on paper, that's what the best answer should be. Whereas I think if we kind of work creatively, we might not have the ideal solution right off the bat, but if there's a way to use other resources to accomplish maybe a second best option for them in the meantime. And I think if I don't want to say push enough, but if we give enough attention to some of these issues, we get there eventually. But I think it would make things a lot easier and more efficient for our community if we started with that mentality instead of using it as a last resort if the follow-up continues. I don't know if that makes sense, but that's just kind of something that's on my mind, and I feel like is pertinent to our priorities.
Yeah, thanks. All right, any other feedback, Commissioner?
Thank you. Thanks for the conversation. I think this is like the first time we've had this conversation. At least I don't remember having it with previous groups of commissioners. So I think the thing that we need to remember is that there will be a tension that always exists. So we have to accept that there will be tensions, right? I think that, quite honestly, as I was reading again about things that are happening in Ottawa County, I am so grateful for everyone around this table and all of you here in this room and those that are watching. We truly have a very special city, special government, people who are doing work for the right reasons, residents who have, I think it's sort of like you're really good at something and then people want you to be even better. Like, what's the next thing and what's the next thing? Like, the things that the city did in the Great Recession, I was a resident, but I wasn't around this table. They have set us up to be at this space. The amount of oversight, you talk about our books and our reports that we have, nobody else is getting that kind of information. I think for me, sometimes the challenge is how much time do I have? And sometimes I have to make decisions about what's the priority for me to pay attention to. And so I think tension is good. Tension creates, I don't know, did Beyonce say that? Tension creates diamonds? Somebody said
write that down.
Oh, yeah, sure. The same thing. You guys know what I'm saying. And so I think this work, for whatever reason, we've decided to be here. Some people will say to us, why do you want to do this? Why do you want to be here? Why, how can you work 25 years, 30 years? And I think it's just something different probably in everybody in this space, in this room. Like, we have a desire to serve. And so with a desire to serve, that means there are certainly standardizations, but I have seen people bend over backwards on a holiday, on a weekend to try to resolve something. And so please know that that doesn't go unnoticed. And I also think that something that I try to remember is that, being clear, I think, is to be kind. To be clear, to your point, City Manager, I think feedback should be timely, it should be specific. If something is frustrating us, how do we share that? Now, I think we also have to remember there's power dynamics that exist in this room too, right? I know if somebody gets an email from a commissioner, they're probably like, oh crap, the commissioner wrote me, I got to respond to the commissioner. Let's bring a little bit of levity to this conversation. Like, that's the reality. And I think sometimes, I know I might not think about that and think about that power dynamic that exists, also in this environment. So I think it's a good conversation. I think it's an evolving conversation. I'd like to see how we can operationalize this even in our 2-on-1s to make it more effective. I think there's always so many things to talk about. And so, but even prioritizing this, like, what's that, these sorts of spaces, like, I'm thinking about how does this a frame for me when I'm going into those meetings to best give feedback and to think about things. I'm thinking about some upcoming meetings that we have with constituents where, there's a meeting tomorrow that Heritage Hill is having around, they want to talk about the land use pieces that are in front of us, given some applications that were on the table and then were denied from an administrative point of view. So I want to bring that because everything else has been said, but I want to remember that if I'm going to come up every day and all the things that we have all gone through around this table and this space and these years, and those of you who are, still new, I don't have to be the new person anymore, is that you fought to be here. and all of you in the room, you have missed things and evenings for your kids, probably foregone vacations for big projects, all those sorts of things. And so just reminding ourselves that tension is good. We have something special here. And when you do something really special, people want more from you.
Yeah. Well said. And I'll just put an exclamation mark on that as we move to the next section, which is economic outlook. And I'll just add one thing too. I know all of us have probably said this more than once when we're giving specific and sometimes critical feedback, that it's not personal. Right? I know we've all had to learn that the hard way as we've had to take a lot of feedback from folks based on our service. But so often it's not personal. And I think we can tell when people get defensive, and that's never our intent. Really, our intent is just to solve the problem and get things resolved. And so we'll continue to work to build those relationships, to give timely and specific feedback, but also to remind folks that we're all in this together and we really want what's best for this community and we want to find solutions. So with that, I'll turn it over to City Manager. I see our CFO come up here, Ms. Molly Claren, and that will take us to our next section, which is related to the economic outlook.
Yep. Thank you, Mayor, and thank you, Commissioners, for feedback. And certainly it's something that we embrace by having a very public discussion around performance. In this discussion here, as Commissioner Sassi has said, this is something that we could have not had, and it has never been had here. But because we embrace the feedback and not afraid of accountability, I think it's good. I think it's good to be heard by all the directors that are here, so they're hearing it firsthand. So thank you for your candor. So we're going to make up a little time discussing economic outlook, and I asked Molly, you have the data. Yeah, you have the data in front of you. So there are no decisions that we are looking for today. There's really no feedback that we need at this point fiscally. We have a budget process. This is just high level kind of year end, and you'll get a comprehensive update on the annual financial report formally by the comptroller and the CFO later this year.
Correct. Good morning, everyone, and happy Halloween. I promise this presentation won't be too scary, but it's.
But I'm bummed.
Thank you. Okay. I do think it is important, City Manager agreed, to get in front of you just because we do have a lot going on. As you know, when we adopted the budget, we have a lot going on with capital. And again, you can see by this first slide, I feel like I'm repeating myself. We're always riding these cross currents because we're in a very unusual time as far as being able to predict what is going on. One thing I can tell you, doing some research, is our Michigan labor market has recovered, which is great. I just pulled between February of 2020 to as of July, Michigan has increased by more than 11,000 jobs. So that indicates, we've come back. We recovered a lot of our jobs as well as gained some more. Consumer spending is also doing really well, and the likelihood of recession has now dropped to 55%. I believe when I presented the budget last spring, we were up around 65-70% chance of the recession. So we went in very conservatively with a lot of our revenue estimates. I'm happy to report that we're able to ease off the brake on that a little bit. The overall, what we could characterize as threats, well, as of last night, UAW has achieved a lot of tentative agreements, so I think the GM was the last outstanding one. The economists had been saying, if the strike goes longer than that 6 to 8 week period, we might have more of an economic impact, but because we have pent up demand, that might not have as much of a strain on us. The war in Ukraine, we also have the Israel-Hamas conflict going on. Seeing the impacts of that, it's an election year coming up in 2024. So again, the key takeaway though is for us as a city is we have wage growth slowing, personal debt is increasing right now, and we're seeing that personal savings people achieved during the pandemic is starting to decrease. So our residents, for us, as a city, we need to be mindful of there's less disposable income out there, and there's probably going to be lower spending going forward. So inflation and supply chain is still an issue. As we shape fiscal year 25, I know myself and the city manager is going to ask a lot about affordability. And if we do see that personal wages starting to grow not as rapidly as we've seen the last 2 years, we might see an income tax hit as well. The other big thing is the cost of borrowing. We have interest rates going up, so we are going into the bond market. We'll look for opportunities for refundings, in that 2 to 5 year period in the future. But as of right now, we might be paying a little bit higher debt service than probably when a lot of projects were incepted. So. Moving on, this is just, I like to include this as just the outlook of how our revenue, our income tax and property tax revenue has performed over time. This is just the percentage increase and decrease. As you know, in fiscal year 22 was an outstanding year. We made a lot in compliance. So that's kind of more of an outlier year, but again, this is just more historical information for you. To talk specifically about our income tax performance, as you recall, we adopted the 23 budget with a forecast of about 6%. Well, we ended up achieving 10.9%, and that's just growth in the base. So again, very, very positive there. With our compliance revenue, this is that one-time revenue. We go and get collections on past years' income tax owed to the city. We had forecasted 10 million, and we've achieved 14. So some of that has to do with revenue being booked that we thought we would be receiving in 24 got booked into 23. So that accounts for some of it. But again, our income tax administrators have been very good at going after, not making sure we're not leaving money on the table. I'll direct you to this graph over on the right. You'll see the last 2 years, our income tax refunds are leveling out around 13.5%. And talking with our income tax administrator, we think that's going to be probably a good forecast number going forward. It's indicative of maybe that work from home factor. We have that non-residents that can, if they're spending more time in their office at home compared to inside the city when they do their work, they can declare that. So this is the new way of working, and we're again keeping an eye on that and polling different companies, see what is their work from home impact. But going forward, this is maybe our new normal. Seeing the side-by-side of our estimates compared to our actuals, you'll see our income tax performed outstanding, 7.6 million above what we estimated. Property tax in line with, what we expected. Again, there's that side-by-side comparison of the growth in the base versus how we performed for compliance. As far as our other revenue streams, the big story here is our gas and weight tax revenue still coming in stronger than what we estimate. We'll be able to put that money into work as well. Looking over at our enterprise funds, this is just a sneak peek of what you're going to see in November when our utility financial officer comes in. It does the water and sewer rate study presentation. So these are for rates that are going to be effective January 1. Build volume is a huge driver of what we predict, or how we calculate into rates. It's that 3-year average. We use a smoothing factor in the rate study. So seeing that our 3-year average is up for both the water and the sewer utility indicates that, that causes downward pressure on rates. So I wanted to share that with you, that the systems are, chugging along there. With Mobile GR, the story with Mobile GR is we've been watching how their revenues have been performing. They're back to pre-pandemic level, but you can see the impact of what's going on with their fund balance pre-pandemic, and then you'll see the fiscal year 20 through 23, a little bit of an increase recovery, but that's really because we were supplementing their capital program with ARPA funds. So we were able to let them kind of regain some of their fund balance, but obviously, going forward, we don't plan to supplement their capital program anymore, and as a result, their revenues can't hold their fund balance, so they're starting to dip into fund balance in order to keep up with their asset management programs. When we get to the budget, formulating the 25 budget, we might discuss possible rate increase just to help them keep up with their capital program and get to a new normal with their fund balance. And then as far as our general fund performance, you can see we ended the year with a surplus of about 6.1 million. Unassigned fund balance 39%. Our policy level is 15%, so that's well above our policy level. The income tax reflects I said that 10% growth, as well as, achieving $4 more million in compliance than expected. So, again, that's great, and that resets our income tax forecast going forward. So I mentioned when we adopted the budget, we had very conservative estimates. We actually had 0% growth for 2024 because the recession might happen, and we didn't want to go negative, but we thought, okay, let's just keep it at 0% see what's going to happen. For the purposes of this forecast, we recast the income tax expectations to 2% for fiscal year 24, and then 3% through the rest of the forecast, as well as reset the compliance revenue. So instead of $8 million in fiscal year 24, we set it at $10 million. And then, of course, with compliance, I said we're still in that catch-up mode, but over the next 2 to 3 years, we're slowly tapering that revenue stream off. So that's why you're like, well, there's growth there. There's growth there, but we still have that tapering off of the one-time money. That's why it looks fairly level. Property tax, again, that's just a stable engine for us in the general fund. I don't believe we achieved more than a 3% growth there in the out years. And then you can see in that green line the plugging in of our ARPA revenue. In fiscal year 23, we applied just under $1 million of it. Fiscal year 24, we do have to get everything obligated. We have to have everything spent by December of 26, but obligated by 24. But we expect a lot of money going out the door in 24. So this is going to be a big year. When I talk to you at mid-year, I'm hoping to dive more into how the programming is going. You can see in fiscal year 24, we're currently estimating a deficit. This is a result of, you can see the total expenditure, really goes up in 2024. That's because of all the programming we have related to ARPA, as well as what we plan to secure in spending using fund balance. So sometimes it doesn't have a revenue match. This is purposeful. You can see our fund balance is well above our policy level, and really we're just putting those funds to work in investment and programming. And then through the end of our forecast, we're still well above our policy level. Going to our budget stabilization fund, as you recall, in fiscal year 23, we did contribute $3.5 million into our budget stabilization fund. So we are back above our policy level of 10% of total general fund expenditures. If I do the calculation in an out year, like for fiscal year 25, we do fall back below our policy level at 9.8%. So that's one thing we can consider if we do want to make a future contribution. We can talk about that with budget when we get to the formulating the budget. And then just as far as our outlook, I wanted to discuss debt issuances really quick because we do have multiple things that are supporting our debt. We've talked about the legislative grants we've gotten related to our fire stations as well as training center, where, we talk in fiscal committee about certain projects we're applying fund balance and system cash to. But this is the, as far as all these different funding stacks go, here's what we're doing on the bond side. So we've already issued for the Ash Lagoon, and I did put up there with the Ash Lagoon, the total all-in project, $16.7 million. But, besides the Clean Water Revolving Fund, we only had to issue $7.5 million because we have the state ARPA money that's coming in to supplement 50% of what we issued. So another $7.5 million there. And then the $1.7 million of the EPA grants. So this is, that's one funding stack. I didn't do it for all of them, but But you can see we're trying to leverage these, like the Inflation Reduction Act and all these different legislative opportunities where we can, so we don't have to issue as much debt. With Lion Square, we're issuing $9 million, and as you know, the DDA is going to pay 80% of that debt service. With Scribner, we did the notice of intent for $60 million. Lion Square, we're planning to issue in November. With Scribner, we are using a lot of system cash from various funds, which we're going to start out with and then probably issue that debt in the summer of 2024. As far as our upcoming, through fiscal committee, you'll see some more notices of intent come through towards issuances. We have the, probably the next two are going to be facilities, and then the DDA, the 20 million related to the amphitheater. Facilities, again, we do these issuances for facilities every few years just to keep up with our own asset management here at the city. But with the DDA, this 20 million is actually not going to be debt paid for by the city. The DDA is, we're issuing on the behalf of the DDA. If we do it for them, rather than them go out themselves and issue debt, we can get that debt at a lower interest cost, just because we have that general obligation ability. So again, I wanted to note that here, as that will be coming through fiscal committee. But again, that debt is a little special because we're more of a pass-through. We do have revenue bonds related to the sewer utility, and of course, street lighting. We do have 10 million there, but we're going to see what our cash position is at that point in time when we consider going out to issue and maybe convert that to just funding with cash. And then we have Knapp's Corner, some parks projects, and then of course supplementing the funding stack for the fire training center. We did go through a bond ratings call last Thursday. I haven't heard the outcome of that. Talking with our bond counsel and underwriter, they believe the call went well and that we'll be maintaining our current bond rating. But of course, if we were to secure another revenue source to secure our debt, that would be a positive thing, especially if we did want to go beyond the boundaries of what we're issuing here. So. And then finally, this is just an update of our ARPA plan. We just did a compliance report through September of 2023, and what we've spent through fiscal year 23, which is about $25 million into our $92 million grant. You can see one of the big things is we've pushed a lot of the affordable housing and vulnerable populations spend compared to when we adopted the budget. Now that we're into fiscal year 24, that we've talked about that $5 million tranche that's just got moved over to fiscal year 24. Still working on the participatory budgeting and special events. Again, still there programmatically in the out years. You'll see we did secure 2 staff positions for the life of this grant to help support everything that they're doing as well.
And some of these will be discussed in the next section, so we don't have to go through.
No, I just wanted to note where we've moved. But besides that, if there are any questions, that was my presentation.
All right, thank you. Appreciate this update. Obviously, we know that with budget, there's always some moving pieces, and so we appreciate this mid-year update. I think I'll turn over City Manager to go ahead and move forward with the next section.
Okay, so if you'll get your 11 by 14 sheet out, and Molly, can you advance it to the next slide, please? There, I'll do that. Thank you. So what we like to do is to look at our strategic priorities within the 6 areas and highlight some of the focus issues that we'll be looking for feedback on for fiscal year 25. and just go section by section. And I think this reflects a lot of the dialogue that we've had through previous briefings and conversations, but we do want to do a check-in before leaving today. So we'll begin with governmental excellence, and you'll see the areas that are in that category. I think most of them are self-explanatory. I'll just highlight a couple. One I do want to pay attention to is the FOIA backlog. City Attorney's here, and if she has anything to add, but we have a significant backlog in one department specifically, the police department, and so we're going to have to think about how we catch up and provide better turnaround time on the significant demand. There's been a significant increase in the number of requests and the complexity of it, because it's not all just written documents, but it's also a lot of video evidence. I think the others are, you're pretty familiar with all the other areas. I'll just highlight one new one, and that is we just talked about the customer experience and responsiveness. And so one aspect of that is on the cost, and Baker Tilly will be coming in and looking, giving a review of our costs for permitting fees and engineering services, and that'll be part of the fee schedule for the fiscal 25 budget process. I think everything else is pretty self-explanatory, and I wish Commissioner Moody was here, because we put the improved experience in our cemeteries down and thought he'd have a lot to say about it, but he's unfortunately unable to be here today. So I'll pause and see if there are other things under governmental excellence that are major issues that we should be looking forward to, and hear your feedback. If noted in other sections, I'll just make that observation.
Andrew, real quick, just for clarification, is there any difference between these columns?
No, the three columns, no. Okay. No. They're not in priority order. That's going to be the next part. Yeah. None, hearing none, we'll move on to the next area. Economic prosperity and affordability. We've talked about several strategies. AHF is Affordable Housing Fund, and looking to potentially get another, it says $5. I think I can pay that. $5 million, I think, is the next tranche we're expecting in the Affordable Housing Fund, and that's due to the sale of Scribner. So then we'll have to think about how to prioritize that funding. I know we got several feedback about whether or not to allocate money to organizations building housing versus individuals who may benefit from closing cost assistance, down payment assistance, things of that nature, and spreading it out over more people.
City Manager, can I ask a question about that?
Yep.
So, we set that Affordable Housing Fund up years ago when the mayor had me chair a task force on housing, and clearly support that work. I think one of the things I continue to worry about with that fund is, this first cycle, we spent a majority of the corpus on projects without some sort of plan on how to make that a sustainable fund. Mm-hmm. And so that's my same fear here, is we have one-time dollars to put into a fund to turn it into something that we hope can be a long-standing, community resource. And I don't fully have my mind wrapped around what are we going to do so that we're not, what is the stable stream of funding for that? And if there's not a stable stream of funding, then, I have concerns about putting $5 million into something that if it gets spent one time, we spend a whole lot of time and effort setting up a board and a governance structure and a process, but we don't have a way to ensure that that can last in perpetuity. And I just want that out there. I guess we kind of use Minneapolis as the model, I think, and that was, they have like 30 million plus in their fund. And, if you take 30 million at today's interest rates, you can spend off the corpus like any typical foundation might do to be able to have an ongoing stream of revenue to try to address your concerns. But if we're going to sell an asset, put $5 million in it, and then we're just going to give $5 million away to a good cause, but not have a sustainable revenue stream, then that's, it seems like we're shooting ourselves in the foot.
Yeah, and it's very different than the county revolving fund,
Yep.
which clearly has sustainability built in.
But hasn't got off the ground yet. So,
We're working on it. We'll get an update today.
so let me, no offense, Al, But just joke. So a couple of things to Commissioner Connor's point. We did talk about that at the Affordable Housing Fund Board retreat on how to leverage, whether there's matching contributions from philanthropy in terms of future donations to kind of leverage it more. Or we did actually talk about the investing in the county's revolving loan fund where there could be more return from that. But you're right. This is a resource challenge, an issue where there's some deposits from pilots. I think that we're getting not very much. But that was a significant consideration at the Affordable Housing Fund Board retreat. Are there any other? I'm looking towards Deputy City Manager Bears. Are there any other resource conversations that we had that outside the two that I just mentioned? Is your mic on?
Just in general, also just fundraising and leveraging the community foundation backbone as a way that folks in the community can contribute to that fund, as well as speaking to institutions, financial institutions, about ways that they could contribute and support that
that's
as
the one.
well.
Yeah.
So there's kind of a strategic focus on building that as part of what this board would help us do.
Yeah, I'm sorry. I have talked to a couple of several financial institutions about using some of their community reinvestment funds to help leverage that funding as well.
Yeah, and I guess, again, I'm just putting it out there that if there's not a sustainable plan, we're going to sell Scribner, and then we're going to go take on debt service to build the new city facility, or we're going to sell Market to Scribner, we're going to take on debt service. Like, there are other needs for capital, and I'm not saying that, building a new city complex is more important than affordable building housing, but unless I have some assurances that there's some sort of viable, sustainable future for the thing, I think it's a fool's errand to make that type of commitment. We had a number of dollars in it, that we've spent. Now, again, we were able to take a big bite out of the apple, but even if we had $5 million in it, it was only earning 3% interest a year. It's only $150,000. But I'd rather spend $150,000 a year in perpetuity off a $5 million investment than spend $5 million once and not have anything, then just dissolve it. And, because $5 million doesn't solve the problem or doesn't even move the needle on the problem. So, I just want there to be some real firm commitment that we have a plan to either leverage that to gain additional dollars, or I'm going to dig my heels in and say we're not putting that $5 million in that fund because it's not going to actually solve the problem. So,
All right. Thank you for the feedback. Let's see what else we should be expecting. Some of the short-term zoning changes coming forward beginning of the year. I think one other thing I'll point out in terms of speaking of sustainability, we have our smart zone is running really well with dual operators. Much improved from previous years. However, the cost of having two operators there is a sustainability issue. So I think they've been able to pay it from using some reserves that they accrued, but that might be an upcoming issue. And of course, they're their own authority, and so they need to figure out how to, we need to figure out how to work through that. But just wanted to highlight that. But I have full confidence that they'll be able to work through it. Everything else is pretty much things that have been discussed before. I think the Third Ward equity funded projects, Commissioner Perdue, you had talked about funding sources for Third Ward. There's still the $1 million budget allocation for that, and we've been working with Third Ward commissioners on potential focus areas to spend that, and I think we've got a little bit more work to do, but hopefully in the new year we'll be able to at least have some unveiling of what those allocations might be for Third Ward. And that's it. I'll pause, see what other comments, questions. Right now.
City Manager, my question is only related to timing. So I know we recently did the groundbreaking at Lion Square and Public Museum, which is awesome. But I'm curious, the East Walk and Leonard to Ann Trail, when will those get started?
I'm going to have to defer to either Ms. Behrens or is Mr. Bergman here today? There he is.
Leonard to Ann is in permitting right now, and we are believing that it will be able to stick with the ARPA schedule, so that would be bids awarded sometime before the end of '24 with construction at least far enough along that we can use those dollars by 2026. East River Trail, East Walk, I'm gonna defer to Tim.
Yeah, the East Walk is the segment of the walkway between JW and Blue Bridge. That's been permitted, it's been bid, so construction will be
Okay.
next year.
So early spring.
Yes.
Awesome. Thanks.
All right?
Go ahead.
Yes.
I think I don't know if I would add this as something separate or if I would put it into kind of construction of river edge projects is, I think last budget year, we had talked about maybe doing some additional supports for business owners with ARPA dollars, and we kind of were looking at, do we have like a revolving fund there, sort of like a CDFI perspective, for different things. I think we determined we were unable to do that from an ARPA perspective, so then we said we were going to put some of those supports specifically to business owners as it related to river edge projects, if I remember correctly. So that's something I'm particularly interested in, so I just wanted.
I think it was a little bit over $1 million that we were looking at reallocating that. Yeah. So we've talked about ways to be more intentional and perhaps even use that money to help some of the firms that help us on our public work projects for Scribner, and so that's in process.
Yeah, specifically to minority and women-owned
Yeah.
businesses.
I think
Per your suggestion.
Yeah.
all of these focus areas are obviously really important. That's why they're here. What really jumps out to me, though, thinking about next year is housing. Like, we have to spend a lot of time talking about housing and taking action on housing. I've heard a lot of folks say on this dais, particularly those who've been at the table a long time, we have to have a lot of tools in our toolbox. It's not just one approach, one solution. And so I think that's the approach that we should continue to take. And to Commissioner O'Connor's point, I think kind of the Affordable Housing Fund is one of those tools in that toolbox that's really important to keep. And I think that body, those co-chairs, excuse me, we had a discussion. I wanted to hear, what was the experience like? What would you do differently next time? And they've been putting some really good thinking around that. And so I would like to see us continue that work and diversify how we seek to approach housing, and quite honestly be a bit more aggressive about, what we're going to do to improve supply and affordability and tenant protections in our city. So I think that has such a cascading effect, and if we don't do it right and we don't do it timely, we are going to be in a much, much, much worse situation that we see other cities throughout the country currently experiencing and having a much harder time rolling back affordability. I think we're at a time where this challenge is still workable, with getting to yes with a lot of different partners and utilizing a lot of different strategies. So I would like to see that be a huge priority going into next year. Throughout the community and certainly for this body.
Yeah, thanks. I couldn't agree more. And I know we're going to have this conversation, City Manager, after you walk through all of these priorities. I couldn't agree more. And I also think that really looking at the current structure around how we respond effectively to individuals experiencing homelessness or the unhoused population. We've been wrestling with the continuum of care structure for a long time in this city, and I personally would like us to look at having an objective third-party review of our structure, and then more information on best practices and what other cities have done to improve their overall system. We have some good models out there, whether it's Houston or Spokane. There's some good models out there, and I think it's hard asking people in our community who are really close to the problem to be that objective reviewer of our system, and I really think that it calls for a more objective expert reviewing that. We had Built for Zero come in, they gave and have given some good feedback, but their expertise isn't necessarily looking at systems as a whole and providing us with options.
Yeah, I appreciate that. I also think, I've been spending a lot of time talking to folks within our housing ecosystem the last few months, and I've gotten a lot of canned feedback about what is not working, and a lot of really great thinking about what could work. I think there's a lot of dynamics around, we hail collaborate, we know the importance of collaboration. We hail it, we need collaboration to move forward. But let's be honest, collaboration is hard. Everyone has their own agendas. Everyone has their own funding sources. We talked about power dynamics within City Hall. When we also think about power dynamics within the city, we think about the nonprofit networks and donors and how all of this fits together. So I do think there's local expertise that can help us solve this problem when facilitated and brought in the right way, right? And even when we were looking at the disorderly conduct and personal property ordinances, one of my criticisms was I don't think that we engage housing providers in a really intentional, proactive way. And leading up to that vote, as I was talking with them, they had excellent questions that I just could not answer, that I wish had been elevated to city staff and the department and even myself much earlier. So I do think we have a lot of local expertise. I don't know if in some of those spaces they are safe spaces to fully criticize, particularly when you think about power and funding dynamics within the city. So I don't want us to lose sight of that. So I do think that there's some things that we can do and bring together locally. We need to think differently about accountability, around incentives, or how do we get folks not just to collaborate, meaning come together and let's have a conversation, but how do we integrate our work to really address those gaps? And how do we sustain that from a funding and revenue perspective? Because that is a big driver. And I have a lot of concerns of what is going on in some of our organizations when it comes to operations and kind of their financial operations. And a lot of that is behind the scenes, behind the curtains, right? And I don't think we'll get to where we want to go without bringing that to light, but that is really difficult to do and toes that tension, that line that we talked about earlier of when is it a private conversation, when is it a private feedback and information, when is it relationship building, and then what needs to be done in public. Last thing on this, I do think, before running for office here at this seat, it is fair for all of us and constituents to criticize the city. That is part of how we get feedback, right? It doesn't always come with 5-star reviews when we hear the feedback. Gosh, I lost my train of thought. It'll come to me. But I just want to elevate the importance of local expertise in helping us solve these problems.
Yeah, and I didn't mean to say that there's not. I know that there is, and having co-chaired the Housing Stability Alliance for a number of years, there was a lot of great facilitation and conversation, and I know there's a lot of great people and organizations working in this space. My observation continues to be, though, that there's a lack of alignment and fragmentation, and as you said, tension, not always collaboration. And I think the overarching observation I've had is the lack of shared, valid, reliable data that we can operate from, and this commitment to being outcome-focused and data-driven across the entire system. And it's a really complicated issue. I know City Manager doesn't want me to get in the weeds because many of us have worked, Commissioner Knight, you were a part of that process as well. And I think we're at a point where I would appreciate some objective, fresh perspective and analysis about what is working well, what are the gaps, and then what are some solutions. And I think, quite frankly, other cities are being much more effective in this space than we are, and we can learn from them. Yeah.
I think it goes to getting experiences outside of our Grand Rapids experience that we talked about earlier. So
Yeah.
am looking forward to hearing what the best practice is, learning from it. The other thing, going back to I've heard two comments on a housing issue, housing supply, and I may not have the numbers exactly right, but hypothetically, so if we are in need of 18,000 units here in Grand Rapids, and whether you build or you rent and you take an average cost of $200,000 a unit, that's $3.6 billion, roughly. And I was speaking with Ryan Kilpatrick about that and how much of that can be market rate investment versus publicly subsidized versus just private investment. And so the problem is huge. It's huge. And we are never going to be able to fix it in one budget. But we have to set reasonable goals for how many housing units we're able to build a year. And if we, and I can't remember the number off the top of my head, it's in the performance report, but and that way that you actually, and first of all, we can't build it all ourselves. We don't build the housing, but we have to think about what can we do as a system. And what I've not heard is a collective plan to build X number of units each year. We know what the problem is, but there's not a collective plan to say this is what we will do as a community over the next 2-3 years. And I thought that's what one of the backbone groups was charged with helping us to do.
That is true.
Yep. Okay, we'll move on to engage and connected. And you heard a very extensive briefing this past last commission meeting, and so I won't spend a lot of time out. There is one area on the enhancements of arts, culture, and heritage that you've not been briefed on yet. That is an upcoming conversation on what we can do to be more deliberate around arts and culture in our community, in addition to all the wonderful things that are going on. But I'll just pause there, see if there's any thoughts or feedback.
Oh, go ahead. We'll start with Commissioner Knight and then Commissioner Isasi.
Pieces that I'm obviously very passionate about is improving our engagement with our neighborhood associations and being able to build them up. When I look at our neighborhood associations, I see them as the extension of the city, the ones that are in the midst of these communities, that are talking to neighbors about what's going on, that are bringing their voice back to us or to the city in particular about the things that they need, but also ways that we can support them a little bit better. Because I think they are vital and they're necessary for the growth of our communities, and we really need to think about how we can not only just support them more, but then also to, on the back end, you got to get those outcomes, right, from the work that they're doing in community and making sure that they're doing the follow through. That's necessary. And then the enhancement about the arts and culture and heritage, that's a piece that is very, I'm strongly passionate about because I am engaged in that all the time. It's just part of my life every day. And I think it's important to have that as a piece of our community, to bring that vitality, and we can connect that directly with when you think about Art Prize and how Art Prize 2.0 was revived to happen this year and was very successful, but also how we can expand that into future years. But it's important to have all these voices from the art space there to help build that in our community. We're building business and entrepreneurship, and it also speaks to the mental health and wellness of our communities, but also how do we support them as a city, because I know in a lot of different communities, they get, those particular entities get a lot of support from philanthropy and from their city as a whole. And philanthropy has supported the arts community in this city for a long time, but they're getting old. They're moving on to other things, right? And if you think about their heritage or their children that are picking up in those spaces, they may not necessarily be concerned more about arts than other people are. And so where do we get that funding to continue to have that vitality in our community so that people from different cultures and communities around here can tap into that and can express what they have to offer to our community? So that's definitely something that I want to focus on, and how we could support that and build that up in our community even more.
Thank you. Mine is really kind of to add into the kind of the comprehensive engagement. I sent this email to the two of to city manager and to the mayor after the last meeting. I think, at maybe the height of last year, we're getting a lot of people who are coming and talking about our continuum of care. And I think that's why this is a dynamic conversation, because to your point, city manager, we're not responsible for the building of these pieces. With the housing commission is the individual and operating organization. I think there's a lot of things that, again, people need to hear things many times by many ways. And so I'd like to, and I know it's also a big lift to do the commission night out meetings, right? I know we talked about some of those technology pieces. Could we also counter that with like commission nights in and do some real specific invitations to different groups of people, maybe to say, come at this time and to do a short presentation, or to be in the room to hear what people are saying, because we're hearing that, but many times we are not we need to be, if I think about it like a RACI, we're not responsible, but I do think we have to hold it accountable, right? We have to hold these systems accountable. And so specific invitations, I'm thinking about those that receive some of our pass-through federal fundings, who are part of specific processes where we're asking for project timelines and different pieces. So, I don't think I would ever want to make anybody, like, you have to be there, but have you come to these meetings? Have you heard what people are saying? And then even advertise it, because I think then we could get some of the engagement that we want. It's not that the engagement we have is not good, but I know we're only hearing from like a very small population at those meetings, and that's not the only time we get that. So I would like to see something like that, where it's a proactive ask for them to come.
Can I thank you for clarifying that. I saw the email that this helps even more. So what you're saying specifically, people who we may fund as part of some of these important policy issues, whether it's housing or whatever, making sure they're here to hear the residents' perspective and concerns, and then to engage with them after the night meeting specifically. So not just briefing in the morning, or find another opportunity when perhaps even when we have community night out, to expand the booths or tables, interactions beyond just city departments, have other services there.
Yep.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Yeah, and I love that idea. And to me, it's an because we also used to have annually an update from a lot of our partners, even partners that we don't fund. So we used to have the superintendent come and give a 20-minute update on Grand Rapids Public Schools, and we used to have the president of GRCC come, and the Rapid, and the Housing Commission, and Grand Valley, and so we had the chamber come, and the Right Place, and they would just do 20-minute updates on the work they're doing and the impact that work was having in the city of Grand Rapids, and then ways for all of us or community members to stay engaged in that work. And I think that was really helpful as well for all of us, right? Like it's not a good use of our time for all of us to meet individually with all of our community partners when they can come and present to this full body, and we can get our questions answered collectively. So I think it's an and to me. I think there's value in both. And we used to do that, and then obviously COVID hit, and a lot of those practices kind of went on the back burner, but I do think it'd be helpful to do that again.
Yeah, even before, I do remember there was a time for scheduled briefings on the old agenda that was in the afternoon, I think it was.
No, we did it right after Cal.
Right after Cal.
Yeah, we did it right after Cal.
Let me rephrase. There was a time of scheduled briefings apart from the Cal meeting, right? It was agendized separately?
Yeah, we would get through the Cal meeting, and then similar to staff briefings at the end of Cal, we had community partners come in and do briefings right after Cal.
So we can certainly, we're already thinking of different community partners to bring, but what we've been trying to do is making sure that they were issue specific. But if we want to just have people come and just generally give updates on what's happening, we certainly can find time to do that. It's just a matter of just balancing the agenda and time. Or if we wanted to have separate time, and that's what apart from that, every commission day, just have community updates, we can do that as well.
Yeah.
I mean, have a separate meeting altogether just for that.
Yeah. Yeah, maybe we can all think about that and give city managers some feedback, and then maybe even provide him with any organization or group you'd like to have feedback. I know the other one that I had asked for is Michigan Works and some of the work that they're doing around, their grants and employment. I know some of you serve on that board, but I think it's good for this entire body to get updated on that work. So we can give you feedback, and then you can take a look at the agenda and see what works in our schedule.
Okay.
All right, next, health and environment.
Health and environment. I think these are all consistent with previous discussion or direction. I know there's been discussion around refuse and waste collection, where we are on reevaluating that. It is a pending study, and don't know the date. When can we expect the completion of the refuse study? Doug?
Yeah, I've been told that it's still going to be.
James?
Our plan is mid-November. And then once we have that information, we're going to review it, make sure it's final. That'll come back to the commission, but we'll also provide a framework for our conversations with the community about what the future both of rates and services might look like based on that feedback.
City manager question real quick on
Yeah.
refuse and recycling. Well, leaves are falling, yard waste is open, but one question I've gotten several times in the last couple of weeks is yard waste carts and adding them to the pay-as-you-throw system instead of having to buy tags for them. So, and then the other thing is just that we've asked about this in the past is bulk tags, yard waste bags being able to be sold and have them available at other locations outside of traditional retail partners, which don't order them often and are out of stock when people have them. So figuring out how to get them at our neighborhood associations and places like that.
So I'm going to, both of them. Now, the first one, I think that will be an outcome of the third-party study that they will be doing. James doesn't want any part of this dais on this conversation. Come on. The second, I'm going to have to have him to, because I thought last year we had the same conversation and we did expand the places of distribution.
We made the offer to the neighborhood associations, but we have not provided anything in terms of tags or bags at this point.
Did they not want to do it?
We've had very little communication with them.
What does that mean?
Yeah, what's something?
We made the offer to them in terms of a pilot. I think West Grand was the one we offered it to, and it never went forward.
So it's just offered to the one?
Yeah, as a pilot.
Okay. I might be able to offer up some folks in the third who might be interested in a pilot if we want to.
I think there's a bigger conversation, though, in terms of getting rid of bags and tags, which would be coming out of the rate study. That's my hope. I mean, I understand the tags on the first ward. Trying to chase down a tag for a yard cart is a challenge, and it'd be nice to move it to the pay-it program. And just so you understand, we've been ordering carts for the last 8 years, and the yard carts have RFID tags in them. So we could move there, and we do have the equipment to do that. But it would be a whole system look at in terms of where we're going forward.
But even a tag for like a box spring or a large item
Bulk item.
sometimes. Yeah, bulk item is a pain sometimes. Well, we should revisit that, maybe even have that as a conversation at one of the NAC meetings.
I think it should be informed, though, by the study, so that we can revisit it with the recommendation, so that you and community can react to our practices, which is not in line. I mean, there are better practices, we know that, for collection. So you said November, anticipated study completion, then we have a policy conversation sometime after.
Okay.
And what I'd like to point out is that as Mr. Hurt referenced, this is a broader systems conversation because there are multiple components to our collection system right now that we know aren't operating as efficiently as we would like. So that's the reason why the rate study is important, because virtually every other community in the country has a standard rate, and it provides a standard set of services for that rate. This is the first community that I've been in. It's the first community that our consultant from 2 years ago had ever been in that has seen a model like ours that has both this technologically forward collection system and this somewhat archaic tagging system coexisting in a single community. So we want to make sure as we address this and we have the conversations with the community that we're coming up with a holistic approach as opposed to addressing the issue that we're having right now, knowing that we have 3 or 4 other issues that still need to be addressed.
Okay, so it looks like we need to get the analysis done and that information to us, and then we'll have a larger discussion based on the findings, and then we will have some policy discussions about how best to move forward. And that will happen in the next 2 months.
Yeah, so I just want to make sure I'm hearing right. Are we not doing anything different in the short term as we wait on this larger?
It sounds like that's probably the best. I think it would probably be even more confusing if we tried to do something now and then come December or January 1, we make a decision to change things dramatically and then have to change things again. So probably best to get the information, be well informed, look at what the options are for us, what the recommendations are, and then have a conversation on how best to move forward.
Yeah. If you're going to make a change to a system, it's been my experience when we've done that before, you need a kind of a long runway. Mm-hmm. So if we're going to look at making some changes, I would recommend it be looking like July 1st. As opposed to January.
And build in the education and information and transition time and, yeah.
Well, I mean, we're talking about long-term and short-term, and what I heard from Commissioner O'Connor, kind of some of what he's hearing, providing tags at different locations is something we talked about back in January. It just seems like something that doesn't need to take a year, but, maybe I'm not understanding from the operational day-to-day standpoint.
Yeah, I think
this is another tension, like short-term, responsiveness, how much resources, time, and effort it entails versus these larger strategic conversations and decisions that need to be made.
Yeah.
Commissioner, if I can, the issue is the systems work that needs to be done to get to that endpoint. So we have our RFID tags in those carts that are being distributed in the community, but our systems currently aren't programmed or configured to calculate the same way as they are for our regular collections. And we also know that those systems right now are really technologically at the end of life, which is why there was some urgency in getting the rate study done, because that entire system might change. So while we'd love to be able to just say, okay, we're going to flip a switch and we're going to start charging per tip on yard waste carts, it's actually not that simple on the back end to make that change as we would like it to be.
So thank you, Mr. Matthews, but I don't think that's the concern. I think it's twofold. We've known that people getting access to bags and tags, particularly for bulk items or for yard waste, is challenging, especially when they have limited mobility. We've been asking for a long time that those be made more accessible to individuals closer to where they live in the neighborhood, whether it's through neighborhood associations or through other businesses. Sometimes ACE has them, sometimes they don't. We have different places throughout the city that have them. Some of us have talked about having them available at our fire stations, which we know are in every ward, in every neighborhood. And we haven't been able to do that, but that continues to be a complaint that we hear. That to me is very separate than us having to change the entire system, which we know is needed, and we're doing the analysis right now, and very likely there will be recommendations coming back to this body to do that. So I think what I'm hearing Commissioner Perdue say, and what I agree with, if we can find a solution, is there a short-term solution to make bags and tags more accessible over the next several months, while we wait for the analysis to be done and potentially a change in the overall system to take place. So, Mr. Hurt, your thoughts on that? I know there's operational issues on the back end.
There is.
But I'm just curious from your perspective, is there a way for us to do that?
Well, yard season's going to be coming to an end shortly, so that's going to be over. But we have in the past delivered those as well.
Oh,
So
nice.
if you remember during COVID, we were doing some deliveries. Having access to those was a challenge for residents. I'd be happy to talk to the neighborhoods associations again. I know they're trying to organize a group called the Clean Green Committee.
Yeah.
We could start with that. They're trying to organize a meeting in the next couple of weeks, and I'd be happy to talk with them about that.
Great. If you could, I think we would all appreciate that. And just see if there's some solutions as we work on
Okay.
improvements in the overall system. Thank you. All right. Anything else on health and environment before we move to mobility?
Mayor, I have one. In our conversation around waste and recycling earlier this year, the idea of how might we address compost? How might we consider compost? So I don't see that represented here, and I would like it to be included.
Yeah, organic waste. Yep.
Okay. And we,
I think that's in the study, isn't it?
in one of the, it's
Yeah,
part of the
it
study,
is.
but we also, I know we had, this body had approved a public education specialist to do more education around recycling and composting, and like some of the other areas, we've been challenged with staffing, so we can get an update on where we are on staffing that position, and being a little bit more intentional about resident education on that as well.
Yeah.
In the short, that's a short-term solution.
Yeah. Commissioner?
Can I just add one other thing around kind of those reports or groups that we talked about coming? I think it was maybe last year that we had some updates around materials management in Kent County and some of their plans. Since we have new members, we probably should put that as an item. So I don't know where.
That's a good point. And if you all hadn't heard, I'm assuming that you have, that the county sustainable business park was kind of put on hold because of a few issues. And so there's, Josh is smiling over there. Chamber's been involved in this space. And so I actually have a meeting later on today with the county, and I'll get an update. But as of right now, that plan is paused. So we'll get an update, and then we'll make sure that you all are updated, but that could be a good update to the full commission as well.
And just one last thing before we move on, and we anticipate the responses for the RFP for Butterworth to be back in front of us in early 2024?
Yes, the RFI is set to go out here.
Is your mic on?
I think it is.
Okay.
But it's set to go out, RFIs will go out first in the next 10 days, I think. And then as a part of that process, we anticipate offering the RFP in early winter.
Great, thank you.
All right. Let's-
All right, mobility? Yep.
Mobility. I don't think there's anything new that hasn't been discussed before. In the area of mobility, we've talked intentionally about the safety of micro transit assets, scooters and bike and pedestrian safety. We had extensive discussion with our fire chief and police and mobile GR, and I've talked about ways of improving safety in those areas. We don't have a geofence solution at this point, but that certainly is one of the priorities.
Great. Any feedback on mobility?
There's nothing in there about all four-way stops becoming roundabouts.
A dedicated complaint line? No, but I will add, this will be an area where we should be getting an update from the Rapid. Again, that's another one. I get calls. People think that we unilaterally oversee the Rapid. We don't. It's a multi-jurisdictional body representing the six
It might work better if we oversaw the Rapid.
And you want to serve on the board? But we should get an update on the work that they're doing around strategic planning as well.
I will say we'll be evaluating in terms of traffic safety. We did have a briefing at Public Safety at the last meeting about speed trailers versus the cost of permanent radar on infrastructure. And speed trailers are certainly more cost efficient. I think it's about a third of the cost of the installation of those fixed radars. So maybe we should be investing in more trailers, and I already talked to the chief, and maybe it's in addition to mobile GR being able to relocate, if the police department staffed more, perhaps they too can help pull a couple of trailers around based on their specific enforcement detail.
Thanks. That was a good briefing at Public Safety. If you weren't able to see it, I encourage you to see it. To me, though, it really affirmed the need to make sure that we have individuals dedicated to the traffic team, knowing that one of the calls we get for service, one of the highest calls for service, I should say, is around speeding and unsafe driving practices in our city, and we really need to enforce those rules. So, Commissioner?
Just a quick note. I think I've brought this up in the past more as just an idea, but again, David had a really great presentation last week around engagement and communications. I think, yes, we should look at what are some investments we might make. Obviously planning, having a response where people can say, I'd like to have a study in my community. But I also think we need our own click it or ticket to get people to, just be more aware of their surroundings and their neighborhoods. I know have been some neighborhood associations that have done different signs in different spaces. There's been people I know who have stood out at main intersections and have just yelled at people to slow down.
That's not what we recommend.
Yes, I should say that. I think it was in the first word, but but I do think we're talking about behavior, and so yes, we can make a lot of investment. It's kind of like masking, and I think we did a lot of that around public health and public safety, and so I don't think it's just us alone, but it is related to public health, and I think the Rapid, Kent County, how could we come together to have a shared message around just reducing speeding around schools and just being aware of things. I just feel like I get people who pass me when I'm going 45 in some areas, and just people have, I just think that there's some different dynamics we could use here, so.
Yeah, agreed. All right, anything else on mobility? All right, really, I see Mr. Nairmore in the audience. Appreciate him and his leadership and all the work that they do in his department, so thanks. All right, next, let's talk about safe community, which clearly is tied to the conversation we just had about speeding and safety for pedestrians and cyclists and scooters all around. Making sure that people are safe on our streets is a top priority. City Manager?
I think staffing continues to be the focus for both police and fire, and making sure that they're fully staffed and be able to respond both proactively and reactively as needed. Cure violence expansion, to all the wards is something we'll be focusing on in the 25 budget, and of course all the new capital that you'll see around fire stations and training center. So I believe we have consultants on staff already, and based on your approval, they're in the early stages of planning.
Good.
Very, very affordable fire stations.
I was going
right,
to say,
very, very
we don't need
modest.
Cadillacs, Chevys. Solid, steady, reliable, no frills. These are public assets. No, one thing I'd like to see added to this list is enhancing victim services. I think all of us have been heartbroken at the increase we've seen in domestic violence cases in our community and communities across the state and country, and the number of domestic homicides that we've seen. And so I know there have been changes over time based on funding, but I think we need to have a real commitment to making sure that we're supporting victims and victim services, and particularly being able to do good work after a domestic assault occurs. So that I'd like to see that added to this list. Commissioner?
I support that. Thank you for bringing that up. And I think recently the Y did a vigil, and there were over 66 lives that were lost to domestic violence. So really kind of supporting the organizations that are doing this work in the community, because I know a lot of our organizations are really struggling, but they want to do the work, and they're trying to be really creative in how we can do that. So if there's a way that we can build some support in for that as well. And then looking at also how the Cure Violence is on there, and I see the Cure Violence, and then I say explore and evaluate the place-based collective impact safe community pilots, and they kind of seem like they're one and the same. I mean, I know there's other things outside of Cure Violence, but that's something that we've been focused on over the last couple of years, and how do we sustain that in the years to come. I know there was some participatory budgeting money that went into creating that pilot in the second ward, but if this is something that has the impact and has the outcomes and the data, how do we continue to support that work in our community? Because we don't want us to get back to having a more violent community. And I know the numbers have gone down quite significantly over this summer, and I was able to be in a very nicely heated conversation about where we've gone as a community, and I want to stay in those conversations and be able to say, we won. So that's something that I'm focused on.
Yeah, thank you. It's important work, and I agree. There's great organizations like the Y and Safe Haven and others doing work in the space of domestic violence. I was happy to see the county funding some of that work, especially for DV court. And then I also think it's really important that we have the support internally at the police department as well with victim services, so that we can follow up appropriately and work really closely with those organizations.
To add to that piece, I know I heard a conversation recently about, and I don't know if this is anything that we can do, but maybe facilitating the conversation on how these organizations don't necessarily talk well, as far as being able to share the communication that they know what has happened, that somebody has come in and filed a report, and that they're able to get that information. And it seems like there's a little bit of disconnect in there, and I don't know how we can help to bridge that, but I think that would be important so that everybody is getting the information, and so we can do the best possible work in serving people in our community.
Yeah, that's good feedback. Commissioner?
Thank you, Mayor. I guess one thing that's kind of a glaring miss to me is just getting both our police and fire departments to full staffing levels. We recently authorized fire department staffing to go up, and police has had authorized staffing for the past 2 budget cycles above what we currently have on staff. So I think that just, to me, needs to be the #1 priority.
Yeah, we can more expressly pronounce it. I think we put a general hiring under governmental excellence, like in every area, but specifically we can emphasize that in public safety.
Yeah, thanks. Commissioner?
Yeah, my colleague stole the words right out of my mouth. I think, as we look at many of these other discussions we've had today, personally, something I've heard a lot about is traffic safety, whether that's, pedestrian or even just heavy truck traffic. I think looking at our city's future, safety has to be the cornerstone of everything. All the money we're pouring into resources and parks, I think they're only as good as people feel safe taking hold of them. And I think we're making good progress in terms of our numbers, but that I would say is my #1 priority too, is just ensuring that we have the personnel and the resources to be able to enforce, but then also, get back into proactive community building. I think that's something we talk about so often and is so important, but can only be done if we, have a department that's not call to call. And I've done ride-alongs. I've seen exactly what it looks like and understand that. So I think getting to yes on that would be a huge win for our community, but then also trickles down into every single one of these other things we've talked about today.
Mayor, it would be good for the chief, I know he's done it in public safety, but doing it for the entire city commission at the work session, an update on where he is on staffing in this department. So I'm going to ask him to come up and give an update.
Hi, Chief.
Hi, Mayor.
Yep.
Thank you very much. Briefly, we have 24 current vacancies, including the 8 individuals who are currently in the Grand Valley State University Academy class. We've been interviewing individuals this week. We are told that tomorrow our new website for recruiting goes live. We had Epic consultants come in and do a whole list, a whole grouping of recruitment videos for us and improve the website. We're excited about that. The best recruitment tool we have is word of mouth in the law enforcement community of that Grand Rapids Police Department is a great place to work, and I credit the mayor, commission, and my boss with kind of turning the narrative around on the police department, because internally we've seen morale improve very much since I've been here, and that has helped us so much. We have hired so many individuals because they've been referred to us from our own employees that are happy to be working here. They feel supported by the city, by the commission, and by the mayor, and that is the key, and that's something I was very hopeful about, optimistic about, and it's put us on the path to. I can't give an exact date to full staffing, but we are much better than even I would have thought we were going to be at this point. And as we head into the colder months, that's a benefit for us to even catch our breath more, because statistically crime goes down, and I think we're going to be looking very good for next summer when we're needed the most. So I'm feeling very positive about the staffing situation.
Great, thanks. Can I ask a clarifying question, Chief?
Yes.
So 24 current vacancies, 8 in GVSU class, so does that mean really 16 hiring?
No.
Or the 8 is separate?
8, so 24, really 32
Okay,
current
okay.
vacancies when we get those 8.
Okay.
Yeah, and where we're really seeing our improvement is lateral transfers, because although we have 8 currently in the GVSU class, which graduate in a couple months, when they come out, we will pair them with a group of individuals. Last time around, we had 5 lateral transfers. Those are individuals we don't have to put through the police academy. We can start them the same time. So this last grouping we had 14. I believe we had 9 in the academy, 5 lateral transfers, all 14 still on the street. They went through the in-house 8-week cycle. They're on the street. Just got an update yesterday. They are all doing well, expected to make it through, succeed, and just seeing them on the street at roll calls and everything, it's good for morale just to have new faces and new energy in those roll calls and see them on the street. So we like to say help is coming, and it really feels like help has started to arrive.
Great, thanks.
If we could have the fire chief do similarly, I know he's started a new class, one of the largest that we've had in some time.
Yes, absolutely. So our total authorized strength was 210 for this fiscal year. We looked at our overtime spend rate and realized we really needed to balance how many people we have versus what we're trying to accomplish. To Commissioner Robbins' point, the core function of our department is riding on those big red trucks, but we're trying to be proactive in many areas. That takes staffing away from riding the fire truck. So we started out at 210. We're now at 223. And when those recruits hit the street in 4 to 6 months, they're going to have a very large impact on our overtime in a positive manner. The 22 recruits started yesterday. Most diverse class in the history of the Grand Rapids Fire Department. And it just brought a smile to my face to see not only the students walk in, but start to hear their backgrounds and their life stories, their lived experiences. But much like the speeding comment, every single day I get approached about when are we going to get more people, because we're still doing force backs. We're not talking a July 4th weekend or a Labor Day weekend where staffing is strapped. I had to force back on a Tuesday last week, a Tuesday in October for no particular reason.
Explain force back.
So force back is I have a vacancy on my big fire truck. I've gone through all the vacations and canceled and recalled. I've done everything I can. I've contacted every single person on the entire fire department to see if they can work that position. And when we finally get to a point and we've exhausted all measures, we start at lowest seniority and say, sorry, I know you had a wedding in Tennessee, you're recalled back to ride the fire truck today. And that's something that we're still going through. And that is truly a morale killer. But as Chief mentioned, help is coming. I keep saying help is coming, and it is. We've worked with CFO, we've worked with manager. I feel we are starting to turn this around, but police and fire both, staffing continues to be an issue, so.
All right, thanks. Commissioner Sassi?
Thank you, Mayor. Thanks for those updates too, and I agree on a good presentation we had at Public Safety. I will say, as chair of the FOIA Appeals Committee, I know that's in the governmental excellence, but I do think that goes to improve police and community relations, having a reasonable response time for the completion of those. And I think we've talked about, we were really on the forefront of body cameras and dash cameras. And so we made a lot of those investments, and to store all that information takes a lot. So that's definitely one of the priorities. Last week after our commission meeting, I talked about Domestic Violence Awareness Month and talked about my also support of how can we continue to enhance our services of what we're responsible for, and knowing that there's a lot of dynamics at play why people might not share. They might, how do we build that trust and having more support to do that? So I second what you said and what Commissioner Knight supported as well. And I think it was just 3 days after that the next homicide due to domestic violence occurred. And so that was really, hard to hear. So I am glad to hear my colleagues say that. And then I do want to also point out, I think, again, we've been on the forefront a lot with oversight and the Office of Oversight and Accountability, and some monumental pieces where I think showed the opportunity for relations to be at a very positive level in terms of oversight language in our contracts. So I don't know if that needs to be stated again, but I do think that's sort of the balance of our public safety system. But I could also see that being part of engaged and connected community when we think about transparency and we think about the reports that will be done, and some of the work that we've gone through as we've made an investment in unpersoned aerial systems. So yes, I just want to uplift accountability in this particular area. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Commissioner Perdue?
Thank you. One thing that hasn't been highlighted that I'm really excited about as a focus area is the co-response model. Continue to invest and improve that. I echo the victim services piece, and also want to add thinking around prevention. Right, so there certainly is a room for response, a variety of concerns and cause and crime, but how do we also think more explicitly about prevention? And that ties into a lot of these other areas, particularly I think economic prosperity and affordability, pathways to opportunity, so on and so forth. So I would like to see that explicitly called out, and I think some of that is oh yeah, actually I see it here, enhanced crime prevention and violence reduction action. So I want to highlight that too. I think that's really, really important part of this conversation. And it makes me think of the engaged and connected community. So when UAS's unmanned aerial surveillance systems passed, there were lots of fear, anxiety, questions around how they would be deployed and used. And so I've asked about, will there be a FAQ available to community just to outline what this is, what this isn't, for clarity, for trust building, for engagement and connection? I don't know if I've gotten a clear answer on that yet, but I think this practice of, particularly when there is significant policy and practice change, how do we transparently and proactively share FAQs, need to knows, even talking points around those, because the average person isn't going to access our meeting minute materials and watch every single cow discussion on a change. So I think that's a really important tool that can enhance relationships, engagement, and ultimately trust and safety.
Yeah, thanks. I think you highlight the fact that so many of these categories are interconnected.
Interconnected,
Yeah,
yep.
they're intertwined. Commissioner Robbins, did you have a comment? Did I see your hand? No? Okay. All right. Go ahead.
So more than likely, going back to the FOIA discussion, I've got a briefing last week, from the police department and law department on the review in resources. So in order for us to make a significant impact to the backlog, there probably will be a need for at least 2 to 3 additional staff in the FOIA unit, in the police department specifically. We've looked at ways in which to reassign staff from other city departments, short-term, contract, but long-term sustaining because of the amount of not only, again, documents, but video and the redaction in order for us to catch up and keep pace. More civilian staff, not sworn staff, more civilian staff will be needed, and the city attorney supports that in her review. So we have to figure out, it now becomes a fiscal challenge with all the things. And what really has happened, we, during the pandemic, for fiscal sustainability, we passed continuation budgets and did not add a lot of staff. But we increased the amount of you do more with less, find ways to yes. We did all that. And we expanded services in many of our departments. And what we're finding now is it's just going back to sustainability. How do we continue to meet those expectations, particularly when people are becoming more active in community, in residents. And so this is another area where we need more. I mean, you can't, we're looking at technology as a way to automate, and there's going to be some improvement in technology, but at the end of the day, there still needs to be a lot of human oversight of those very important and sensitive documents. So we'll likely be figuring out when to bring forth a budget amendment for you, because we can't wait until the budget itself, because it's just that important. The other, regarding the educational materials on the drones. I agree with that, and that's not, the policy is real transparent. So between our oversight office, police department, and our office of communications, that should be something that we should easily get out, and I'm going to have to just ask, because I don't want to continue to have the question asked and kind of answered again weeks later. Where is the information on the surveillance deployment of drones found at this point? We have surveillance policy, we have police department.
Sir, we had a very dense link on our police department website, which we took down, and Jen Kalchik now has created a first draft for the FAQs to simplify it, because there was just too much information. So we do have a draft, and we'll get that to you before we meet again.
All right. Thank you, Chief. Thank you. I agree. I went to the website, and it was a little heavy. Not easy, not user-friendly, I should say. Yeah, so thank you, Chief, for working on that. And thank you, DC Rogers. Thanks. Okay, any final thoughts before we go to the last question before us today during our time together? All right.
Under economic prosperity and affordability, so I know we have an equitable economic development and mobility strategic plan. And in conversations recently, as we got updates around development, I think it was Commissioner Yasasi who challenged us to bring an equity framework to development in our city, just like we have done with the river development and things like that. So I just want to bring that up in this conversation, because I think that's really important. And in context of what Ms. Claren shared around decreased savings, pressures on folks' disposable income, and folks looking for other ways to bring in revenue, particularly with their, let's say if they have an asset like a housing or a small business. How do we support the average day person, right? And how do we make development accessible to them? I think that should be a priority of this body. I was talking to a nonprofit recently that wanted to do some development, bring some housing in for some special populations, and the $2,500 application fee without really understanding kind of that clarity of what's permissible, what's not, was really really set them back, right? And I think we'll see the same things when we think about our local business owners. I've been having similar conversations around how do they navigate our processes and afford our processes as they look to sustain their very micro and minority-owned and women-owned businesses. So I think that it's process improvement, it's also user experience, it's also efficiency, affordability. That framework needs to be brought, obviously, to all of these areas, but certainly around economic prosperity and affordability, because that has cascading effects. In addition to the data that Ms. Claren shared, the greater Grand Rapids area is the highest area for income inequality in our entire state. Our top 1% make 24, 25 times as much as our bottom 99%. So again, when we talk about context and pathways to opportunity, economic prosperity and affordability is one way that as city we can support that, but we won't be successful if we don't bring that lens of how does this service everyone, particularly those who might not have as much working capital or experience navigating city government to get things done. So I wanted to highlight that as a focus, an intersectional focus area, particularly for that priority area.
Yeah, thank you. I think that's very much aligned with some of the feedback some of us have shared with the city manager and some of the department heads as well, is how do we make sure that we're providing good information on the front end so that people understand the process, but also that it's easier to navigate, especially if you don't have an attorney and an accountant and a designer and an architect that's working for you. You should still be able to interact with the city and get through the bureaucracy without having it break your bank and without having it be so frustrating. Yeah, good point. All right, City Manager, turn it over to you for feedback from us on prioritization. I know you want us to share our 3 strategic priorities and top 3 issues with you.
Yeah, and just to hear, just go around the table, and it doesn't require any dialogue, just to hear today, if you take the 6 strategic priorities, what are your top 3? And then beyond that, your issues, it could be all in one priority or it could be across different areas. So you have 6 ways to give feedback. But if you can prioritize, much appreciated. All right. So we can start.
Mr. Robbins, you want to start?
Yeah, I can start. And I guess I feel like I shared a lot of my feedback kind of throughout our discussions, but I did I don't know whether you want to call them issues or priorities. I guess my top 3 and kind of how I consolidated them. One of them being just essential services and infrastructure, looking at yard waste, looking at how we can use technology for making sure that the core functions of why a city exists are being done with good customer service, proactively seeking out feedback. That kind of encompasses one issue. Second, I would just say constituent relations in community connectivity. Just figuring out, again, like how do we go about reaching the average citizen of the city to make sure that we're getting their feedback on things. I think Commissioner Isasi's point was exactly spot on when, we get maybe 100 of the same people at 90% of our meetings, and that's like 0.05% of our city population. And so how do we expand that even to like 10% or creatively think about how to reach, the families that are too busy to even care about what happens at City Hall. I think to get a true diverse perspective on city services and on how we can best serve our community, that's really important to me. And then third, the top priority, again, like I mentioned, is just making sure from a safety standpoint that we've got all the resources we need. When it comes to traffic, when it comes to projects downtown, potentially bringing in thousands of new visitors and tourists, making sure that they're safe, making sure that there's consistent presence, with the hot team. Proactive community relationship building just takes enough people and enough resources to be able to do all those things effectively. So, that would be my number 1. So. Hopefully that's helpful. I don't know if that quite answers your question, but.
Yep.
Yeah, very helpful.
Cool.
Thanks. Commissioner Knight?
I've never stayed within the boundaries of rules, so I'm just going to put that out there right now, because it's really difficult to just narrow things down to a 3, because a lot of these things do interconnect, and one actually helps enhance the other. Housing definitely is something that's always on the forefront of my mind when we think about access to housing and affordable housing. Who is it affordable for, and who are the people out there that are making decisions for the people that are able to access the housing, and how is that equitable for everybody that's engaged with it, and how we're dealing with our unhoused unhoused population, and just all of those things, I think are really important for us to go back to the start and really get a good grasp on what's going on, looking at, us moving into our winter months, and how are some of our unhoused populations going to be housed, and how are these organizations talking together, and how are these systems actually not working because they weren't really created to work in the first place. So those are some of those pieces that I'm thinking about, as well as when we talk about safety, again, and we talk about being proactive and helping people get the services they need, violence reduction, and working and supporting our organizations in the community that are supporting people that are parts of these violent acts and things that are happening in our community, but then also that attaches back to our police and how we're staffed and getting the staffing that we need and qualified individuals, not even just them going through the training, but making sure that they have connectivity with the community, that they know the community that they're serving, that they're a part of that community, so that there's relationship building in there, and we have less negative interaction and more positive interaction in that space. And then also, the other piece that I think I talked about earlier is really thinking about how we're enhancing the culture and heritage of our community. We know that our population is becoming more and more diverse, and how are we offering opportunities for all of them to be a part of this community, to feel like this is home, that they are a part of everything that happens here, and that they bring an integral part or bring some value to how we grow and do things in our community. And I know this is where I'm breaking the rules, but those small business supports for organizations, developers, minority, women-owned businesses, micro businesses, how are they getting the supports to stay productive? We know that small business is the major part of financial increase and sustainability in our communities, and they're necessary. How do we make sure that they're not necessarily just getting the crumbs from the table and what's left, but they're able to access the things that are available to everybody, and not having the same actors being the ones that are walking away with the greater piece of the pie, but that they have a chance to sit down at the table too and access the things that they need to be sustainable, to grow, and to be able to provide for their families, to see a future that looks very different than what they may see right now. How are we going to feed into that and help grow that space? So those are the things that all of it is important. It's just not one thing you can say, right? So that's really difficult right now to have to choose that. But if I would rearrange things on this plate, this is probably where I would go.
Yeah, thanks, Commissioner. Commissioner O'Connor?
Thank you, Mayor. City manager led with it, so that's what I'll lead with too, is fiscal sustainability. That's what I always harp on in all these conversations. Just, I'm glad to see that CFO recommends, keeping our fund balances where they're above our thresholds. It's important, especially given the uncertainty in the world right now. Two is probably zoning changes. Just wanting to see that project through to fruition, because I do think, we talk about housing in all capacities. That's the thing that will matter most. And, finally, probably just the transition and what the future looks like for getting off 201 market and making that transition in a capacity that the timelines work for everybody and budgets stay within things we can afford.
By May 1.
There we go.
Has to be done by May 1. Thank you. Commissioner?
Thank you. Thanks for the work that went into this morning. And wow, you all must be special, because we've never gotten done early on any of these. So let me go fast. All right, my three strategic priorities would be in safe community and economic prosperity and mobility. My top three issues are, these are really two, but housing and homelessness. So looking at our zoning and land bank, and then also looking at the continuum of care. I think thank you to City Manager and the Mayor for spending a lot of time in this space. And I think the reality is we live in a world of the nonprofit industrial complex. I worked in a for-profit company. I now work in a nonprofit focusing on financing for small businesses. It is the most competitive environment I've ever worked in, right? Because I think scarcity takes impact. So I support looking at, I do believe we have lots of good knowledge here, but I also think we sometimes need somebody who doesn't have a vested interest in the work that we're doing to give us a recommendation. We've done that in the past with our public safety staffing, and I think that's been helpful to get us to the point that we're at today. So I'll use as an example. community relations as it specifically relates to policing. So I will bring up, again, domestic violence victim supports. I think that just is an area that continues to plague our community. And if we could get additional supports, I do think, what can we work on the front end, but we're part of sort of the response as it relates to what's in our charter and what we have authority over. And we talked about the FOIA too, so I think that one's probably further along. And then under economic prosperity, improving our business corridors. And I think this is tied into mobility as well, as we looked at, the reframing of our DASH system over this last year. But I also think that, people want to have, to Commissioner Knight's point, people want to have their individual identities and like where they're at. I was at an event yesterday, the caterer didn't show up, they got fatalities, and I was like, second war, it was just, there was a lot of pride around sort of our different corridors, and I think that can also help with like engagement as well. What are the things that we're learning, and obviously different CIAs are in different spaces with funding, and sometimes there's just a lot to be learned, so I'm glad that we did have that session last week that Economic Development put together. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner. Commissioner Perdue?
Economic prosperity and affordability, engaged and connected community, and safe community are the kind of big bucket areas that, if I had to choose, they're all really important. I would say are kind of top of mind for me. Take it a little bit more granular. Though this isn't governmental excellence, I think, kind of bringing it back to the beginning of this conversation around helping constituents with their issues. One follow-up question I have is who should help, clarity on who should help me chase those issues, as you put it earlier. And how do we make that process a little bit more efficient, because we already do have a lot of services and staff ready to respond. Certainly, housing is a huge one. I said that earlier. And you mentioned, City Manager, that there were equity fund, and so really excited to kind of finalize those recommendations and bring them forth here, because it cross-cuts with a lot of what we talked about today. Generally speaking, that equitable framework and accessibility around economic prosperity, pathways to opportunity, as well as communication are also, I think, really important, top priority for me. And then finally, that crime prevention piece in particular, with appropriate responses on the back end, kind of highlighting the co-response models and the victim services model as two examples of that. And then finally, also looking forward to the conversation around materials management, trash, recycling, compost. So I know I didn't stay within those bounds perfectly. I can give you my notes. It's hard to choose, right? But they're all really important. So those are top of mind from this list of 100 things. Six isn't bad.
Thank you, Commissioner. Well, I'm going to add to that because, I think for me, and this is the social worker in me, I've always had a holistic view. And the reality is that great cities are doing exceptional work in all of these areas and not just one. And we know that all of these issues intersect to create a city that has a high quality of life, that has safe neighborhoods, and is a place where everyone has access to opportunity and the opportunity to build wealth. So I'm with you, they're all important. But when I think about, for me personally, as I think about the year ahead, there are some key things that I think we need to continue to put additional focus on. So I would say all of these need to continue to be a focus of ours. Housing, affordable housing, and improving the system that currently exists to respond to individuals who are most vulnerable, I think is absolutely essential. Economic prosperity for small local businesses, women and minority-owned businesses, I think is critical. Safety is kind of an underlying foundation for all of that. And I think, continuing to do a lot of the work that we're doing around, prevention and co-response, and better supporting victims, I think is all important, and getting back to staffing in both our fire department and police department. And then moving the needle on these big transformational projects. A lot of them have federal dollars tied to them. If we miss deadlines, we will lose federal funding. That has to be a priority for us. It would be shameful, in my opinion, to walk away from any dollar that we've been given from the federal government or state government, and making sure that we're putting the resources that we need to get over the finish line with all of these transformational projects. And the projects not just downtown, but in our neighborhoods. So MLK Lodge, Roosevelt Park Lodge, Plaza Roosevelt, all of those are really important projects. The fire stations in the 3rd Ward, we know that those are needed to increase and improve response times. So those are big picture, some of the ones I want to continue to work on while I continue to sit around this table. All right, City Manager, any final questions or thoughts before I see if our City Attorney or City Clerk have anything to add, and then I'll open it up for public comment.
Two things. One, I neglected, when we were talking about refuse and tags, didn't know if our City Treasurer had any thoughts. Is he still here?
Can I see John?
He left.
Nope.
Okay. Well, certainly we'll get his perspective. The other is on safety. It occurred to me the ambulance response time. I've heard a lot of feedback from members of our community about the responsiveness of our ambulance system, and that's another system we don't directly control. What we do control is how fast police and fire, first responders arrive on scene, and so that requires more than just a budget conversation. That's a big policy issue we'll have to keep an eye on in the future. And then lastly, well, a couple things. First of all, I appreciate the feedback from the City Commission today and your willingness to engage on some of these tough conversations, and then have conversations with each other, and be willing to be transparent in public. And I think all this helps us to become better as an organization, and I think it's good for me to transfer the feedback and to departments, but it's also good for the employee that's on the equipment now. If they chose to, department head could point to some of the feedback that we heard today from City Commission. And I want everyone in here to know, as well as our city employees, that what we said today was, it's one of the things you do when you do strategic planning. You look at your strengths as well as opportunities to improve. And I think our annual performance report was one of those moments where we celebrated the things we accomplished. We accomplished a lot, and I'm incredibly proud of the work that is done in this community, and very appreciative of the work and the sacrifice, particularly when you are away from family. There are parts of the city that doesn't shut down a day of the year and continue to operate 24 hours, so I am very appreciative. But like every high-performing organization, we want to continually get better, and so this is an opportunity for us to be better, and we embrace it and look forward to building upon it. But do know your work is very, very much appreciated.
Thank you, City Manager. City Attorney, anything to add?
I'll just say I appreciate the feedback as well. Oops. I'll just say I appreciate the feedback as well. It helps us in the work that we do to know what's important to you all. And I appreciate Mark and his team, because this is, I gotta say, one of the most informative, well-done workshops that I've attended since I've been here. I think it's been 6 years now. And so I appreciate the work that you all have done on this, Mark. I remember when you came, you were we were all over the place, and you said, well, who takes ownership of this, and why do we have all these things all fragmented all over the place, and then you start to work with us on the strategic plan, and every year we keep focus, you refocus us on that strategic plans and what our goals are, and what's our strategy, so that we're not all over the place and we don't have that continuation, even more so of we've been talking about this with the city for the last 15 years, and what has been done, nothing's been done. And so I think we've stepped a long way from that. There's still people that complain, and we'll always have people that complain, but I think that you and the team have brought us a long way over the years that you've been here.
City Clerk, anything to add? No? Just a reminder that we have an election next Tuesday? All right. All right. With that, Commissioners, that will take us to our last thing on our agenda, and this is public comment. So if there's anyone here who wishes to be heard, you can go up to this microphone over here, share your name, the city that you live in. I'll give you up to 3 minutes to speak. Is there anyone here from the public who wishes to speak? Yeah? Okay. Come on up. You can go to this microphone up here. Mr. Asante will help you out there. Hi, welcome.
Hi, how you doing? My name is Kevin Bowman, and I reside in the city of Grand Rapids.
Great.
Southeast Side, 3rd Ward. I want to start with say thank you, Ms. Perdue, for having some type of transparency with the issues that we have in our community. I think it starts with addressing, I appreciate that. I'm kind of all over the place. I can't see what's the name, but to piggyback off responsiveness from the mayor. It's kind of hard to get on that conversation because the community has limited access to our representatives, from housing to court system, anything. We'll get no communication back from, like I said, we have no access to speaking with our representatives, from commissioners to city attorney to manager, mayor. How do we get that communication open to the public? And okay, and then to talk about the parks and the fundings for the parks, like you said, the parks, money's been invested, but it's not safe. Money where it's been invested, it needs to be updated with the equipment there for the kids to play on, events that the kids can go, free events that kids may go to, to have something to do in the community. What else? And then piggyback on the FOIA. How is it, who's approved and denies the FOIA? That the community has being denied their information, their evidence that's on them. Even with the OPA, they have to request for our information, as is they have the back end of helping us with complaints and all that, which goes to internal affairs, which is primary. It's what can I say? Employed with all Caucasian, no employees in my skin color. So where's the transparency of that? Another thing is with the housing, or what about a medical assessment for us as minorities? There was an assessment plan, a coordinate plan, Michigan Street coordinate plan put in place back in 2012, and that study area of an investment areas is primarily Caucasian. It's from Fulton, Leonard to Fulton, from downtown to East Beltline. Where is the studies for the 3rd Ward, like of our health? And then to piggyback off of communication and customer service from the employees and the citizens, the customers, I should say. In our community, a lot of our business are from us, so the communication and customer service is very disrespectful because it's a lot of, foreigners running our business. The only business that we actually have of ours is probably food restaurants and stuff, which impacts our health. Nothing that's better us in our community that's being, placed in our community to help us. Mentally, physically, financially, none of that.
Thank you. I'm sorry. No, that's okay, Mr. Bowman. Your 3 minutes are up, but we would be happy to make sure that you're connected with somebody else if you have additional feedback for us. Thank you. Thank you for coming and for your comments. All right. Anyone else? All right. I'm going to close that public comment period. And with that, Commissioners, we will adjourn our special meeting today on October 31st. I hope everyone has a very safe Halloween, and remind everyone to get out and vote. Next week on Tuesday, we have an important question before us for an extension of our Grand Rapids Public School millage. All right. Thanks, everyone.
Good job.